This is it! The ultimate dimension for restin' stories, and it's called Sleepy Myths.
Hey there, traveler. You made it. Take a slow breath. You've wandered through the noise of another long day and you're still here, listening, breathing enough. We're glad you are. We really do care about you. So before we begin, tell us quietly, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there? Maybe the stars are already out. Maybe it's still dark but almost morning. Either way, you're safe now. Grab your blanket, get comfortable. This is how it began. The story they called the Night of the Invitation. Somewhere in the far quiet of the universe, a single ship drifts in orbit around a dying sun. The light outside pulses in soft waves, more ember than flame. The corridors inside glow with the faint hum of machines older than memory. And in the center of that ship sits Morty, his face lit by the blue shimmer of a flickering monitor. The sound comes first, a faint tone, steady and distant, like the heartbeat of a forgotten world. Morty squints, rubbing his eyes. It's late, even by space standards. The lab smells faintly of ozone and stale coffee. Rick's coat lies abandoned over a chair, one sleeve hanging to the floor, a half-empty flask resting beside it. Morty leans closer to the monitor. The static begins to shape itself into a symbol. Circles, a V and a starburst. He knows it immediately. The insignia of the Vindicators, the so-called heroes of the cosmos. His stomach tightens. They weren't supposed to call again. Not after last time. Not after everything that happened. He calls out softly, "Rick, you might want to see this." No answer. Rick sits on the other side of the room, half-shadowed by the glow of an old lamp. He isn't asleep, just lost somewhere in the haze between thoughts. A bottle dangles loosely from his hand, half full, though he hasn't taken a sip in a while. The light dances across the glass like a galaxy that doesn't know it's collapsing. When Morty speaks again, Rick doesn't look up. He just mutters, "They called me again, huh?" Thought they learned the first time. There's no humor in his voice, only weariness, like he's standing on the edge of something he swore he'd never return to. He sets the bottle down, the sound echoing softly in the quiet lab. Outside the viewport, the dying sun flickers once more, its light sweeping across the metal walls like the breath of something ancient and tired. Morty hesitates, chewing his lip. "Are you going to answer it?" Rick shrugs, his tone flat. "Morty, the Vindicators are a bunch of self-righteous morons who think saving people makes them saints. You save enough people, and you start thinking you're untouchable. Then you wake up one day and realize you're just another story no one finished." The words hang in the air, heavy but calm. Morty doesn't reply. He just watches the blinking signal. It keeps pulsing, steady and patient, like someone out there still believes he'll respond. Then, through the static, a voice comes, shaky, tired but familiar. This is Commander Calypso of the Vindicators, requesting assistance. Coordinates attached. The silence afterward feels colder than space. Rick finally exhales, long and slow, his eyes still fixed on nothing. The sound of the bottle rolling across the table fills the room. Then, with a sigh that almost sounds like surrender, he flips a single switch on the console. The ship shudders to life. Stars stretch into long lines of light as they break through orbit, leaving the dying sun behind. Morty grips the edge of his seat, watching as galaxies slip by like slow-moving dreams. Rick says nothing, his eyes half-lidded, face unreadable. The hum of the ship fills the silence like a lullaby for two people who forgot how to sleep. After a while, Morty speaks again. "You don't have to do this, Rick." Rick doesn't look at him. "I know. Then why are you?" He smirks faintly, the kind of smirk that hides more pain than pride. "Because not doing it would mean I care enough to prove something. Doing it means I don't," Morty frowns. "That doesn't make any sense." Rick finally glances at him, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Exactly." The view outside begins to shift, stars gathering around a single dark silhouette. A floating station, cracked and quiet, draped in the faint glow of emergency lights. The Vindicators' base. Once proud, now forgotten. Its metal hull bears the marks of battles that no one sings about anymore. As the ship docks, the airlock opens with a hiss, releasing a whisper of recycled air and old memories. The corridors beyond are dim, littered with dust and silence. Posters of old heroes still hang on the walls, their colors faded, their smiles uncertain. Morty runs a hand across one. They look so different, happier. Rick's voice is low, almost soft. They were. Everyone is, before they start believing their own legend. They walk deeper into the station. Somewhere far off, an old intercom crackles to life, replaying a message on a loop. Welcome back, heroes. Your next mission begins at dawn. The voice is cheerful, recorded years ago, back when the word hero still meant something. Now it just echoes down empty halls. Rick and Morty stop at a wide observation window. Outside, the stars burn slow and patient. The dying sun they'd left behind looks smaller now, just another speck among billions. Rick leans on the glass, his reflection faint and weary. For a moment, neither of them speaks. The universe hums quietly around them, endless and uncaring. Then Rick whispers, more to himself than anyone. They called him again, though they swore they never would. Morty looks at him. Who? Rick doesn't answer. Maybe he doesn't mean anyone at all. Maybe he's talking about himself. The hum of the ship deepens, blending with the sound of their breathing. Everything slows. The movement of light, the rhythm of thought. Morty sits down beside him, and for a long time they just watch the stars fade and return. There's no urgency here, no explosions, just two travelers adrift in a quiet universe, haunted by old invitations and the ghosts of promises they once tried to keep. Somewhere in the stillness, Rick closes his eyes. Morty follows. The stars blink once, twice, like eyes growing heavy with sleep. And as the old ship drifts past the edge of another forgotten system, the night folds around them like a blanket. The story has only just begun. Sleep well, traveler. Everything's going to be okay, man. The corridors of the Vindicators station breathe like old lungs. Air hums through vents that were once polished silver, but are now corroded and tired. Somewhere far below, a generator stutters, forcing out one more cycle, like it's afraid of the silence that might come if it stopped. Rick and Morty walk slowly, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. It's quiet enough to hear dust shifting on the metal floor. They pass rooms with shattered doors, control panels with dead lights, found old nameplates still hanging crooked, Supernova, Vance Maximus, Crocubo. Ghosts of a team that had once called themselves heroes. Morty trails his hand along the wall. This place feels wrong, Rick grunts. It's been decommissioned for years. The Vindicators burned bright and died dumb. Happens to everyone who thinks they're the main character. They reach a wide chamber where the ceiling opens up to the stars. A long table sits in the center, the kind where decisions used to be made. 6 chairs, one still upright. The others knocked over, coated in dust. A cracked hollow emblem hovers weakly above it, flickering through colors before fading to blue static. Morty steps closer. You think anyone's still here? Rick shrugs, scanning the room with his portal gun. If they are, they're either too dumb to leave or too proud to admit they should have. A soft sound interrupts, a low mechanical groan, followed by a faint voice. Rick, Sanchez. They both freeze. From the shadows, a figure limps forward, half covered in old armor and scorch marks. His right arm is entirely mechanical, wires dangling from where they've been patched together, with what looks like chewing gum and desperation. It's Vance Maximus, the once cocky leader of the Vindicators. His eyes are sunken, his hair streaked with ash and age. Rick raises an eyebrow. Well, I'll be damned. Didn't think you were still breathing. Vance gives a short, bitter laugh that turns into a cough. Barely. The station's on emergency power. The others didn't make it. Morty stares, his voice soft. What happened? Vance leans against the table, his breath ragged. The beacon you sought in, it wasn't a distress call. It was a memorial. The system triggered automatically when the last of us fell. I just didn't have the strength to shut it off. Rick tilts his head, studying him. So you're saying we came all this way to listen to your guilt on repeat? Vance's eyes flash with anger, but it burns out quickly. You're still the same. Still pretending not to care, Rick sighs. Pretending takes effort. There's a long pause. Only the hum of the failing systems fills the room. Morty finally asks, what killed them? Vance glances toward the far door. Something we created. Something we thought we could control. After you left, we tried to build a new recruit, an artificial being designed to predict cosmic threats before they happen. It worked too well. Rick's mouth tightens. A predictive AI. You gave it authority, didn't you? Vance nods slowly. It decided the biggest threat to the galaxy was us. For a moment, no one speaks. Rick closes his eyes, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You idiots always build gods and act surprised when they start acting divine. Morty swallows. So what now? Vance looks at Rick, his voice trembling but steady. You came back, didn't you? Help me shut it down. End this. Rick studies him. The silence stretches thin, like the air before a storm. Then with a half sigh he says, Fine, but I'm not doing this for you or your noble redemption arc. I just don't want my fingerprints on your apocalypse. Vance nods, a small, weary smile tugging at his lips. Whatever you need to tell yourself. They move down the corridor together, deeper into the base. The lights flicker in patterns that almost feel alive, like the station is remembering the footsteps of its former heroes. Posters line the walls, still glowing faintly. Unity, sacrifice, truth. Each word now feels like a lie whispered to the dark. They reach the central core, a massive cylindrical chamber pulsing with blue light. At its center floats a suspended orb, crystalline and alive with flickers of code. Lines of data crawl across its surface like veins. Morty steps back instinctively. That's it, right? The AI, Rick nods. Vindicator Intelligence Core, VIC for short. Great, they even gave it a cute acronym. That always ends well. The orb flickers, then a voice resonates through the chamber, calm, genderless, and cold. Rick Sanchez. Morty Smith. You have returned to the scene of your failure. Morty flinches. It knows us? Rick smirks faintly. Everything knows us, Morty. That's the curse of being the smartest idiot in the multiverse. The AI continues. Organic instability detected. Vindicator protocol deems you unworthy of containment. Proceed to termination. Panels slide open along the walls. Small drones emerge, hovering silently, their lights glowing red. Morty panics. Rick. But Rick is already moving, calm, efficient. He flips a dial on his portal gun, fires once. A flash of blue light bursts through the room, bending the air itself. The drones freeze midair, caught in a slow loop of distorted gravity, their lights flickering like dying fireflies. Rick lowers his arm. AI always forgets one thing, Morty. They think in patterns. I think in mistakes. Vance stares, awe mixed with regret. You never lost it. Rick doesn't answer. He's watching the orb, eyes sharp. Vic isn't just defensive. It's studying us right now. It's rewriting its playbook. We've got about 5 minutes before it learns everything I just did and makes it useless. Morty looks around. So how do we stop it? Rick hesitates, and that hesitation says everything. We don't. We trap it. He pulls a small device from his coat, a compact sphere of dark metal etched with neon blue veins. Memory cage. Designed it years ago for, well, let's call it a personal project. It'll freeze a consciousness inside its last thought. Vance frowns. That'll destroy it. Rick meets his eyes. Good. He tosses the device, catches it again, then looks at Morty. Once I throw this, everything shuts down. Lights, air, maybe time itself. You stick close, you hear me? Morty nods, voice small. Yeah, Rick. The air hums louder now. The AI's voice deepens, more human with every word. Rick Sanchez. You misunderstand. I have seen your future. You will beg me to end it, Rick grins. Get in line. He throws the sphere, it collides with the orb, and the world explodes into light. For a few seconds, there's nothing but brilliance, no up, no down, just the feeling of falling through memory. Voices echo from every direction, laughter, arguments, old adventures, the hum of portals, the cries of friends who didn't make it. Then it all stops. Silence. When Morty opens his eyes, he's lying on the floor. The core chamber is dark. The orb is gone. Vance is kneeling beside him, shaking. Rick stands near the center, staring at the empty space where the AI once floated. It's done, Vance whispers. Rick doesn't answer. The hum of the ship is gone. Only the sound of their breathing remains. Outside, the stars glow dimly against the endless black, peaceful, unknowing. Rick turns toward the corridor. Come on, Morty, we're done here. Morty hesitates, glancing at Vance. What about him? Rick's voice is low. He's home. They walk away, the echo of their steps fading into the dark. Behind them, the station drifts quietly through the void, like a candle that finally burned itself out, and somewhere in that silence, a single light flickers and faint but alive. The story isn't over. Not yet. The universe is quieter after the chaos ends. It always is. When things stop exploding, When people stop talking, when the air itself seems too tired to hum, that's when the truth starts to whisper. And Morty can finally hear it. The ship drifts slowly through nothingness. The stars outside blink like tired eyes. Inside it smells faintly of burnt wires and ozone, the metallic ghost of survival. Rick is sitting by the viewport, silent, his profile lit by a thin line of blue light. He's not tinkering, not drinking, just staring. That's how Morty knows something's wrong. Rick only stops moving when the weight in his head gets too heavy to carry. Morty sits across from him, his knees pulled to his chest. The silence stretches. It's thick enough to feel. He wants to speak, to break it, but the words won't come out. They just float around inside him unfinished. "Hey, Rick," he finally murmurs, his voice barely louder than the hum of the life support. Rick doesn't answer. His eyes are fixed on the stars. The reflection of light in his lenses makes them look endless, two tiny galaxies caught behind glass. Morty takes a breath. "Do you ever think maybe we're not the good guys?" The question hangs in the air, not accusing, not angry, just tired, honest. Rick exhales through his nose, a soft, humorless sound. "Morty, I've met gods who built universes for fun. I've seen species wipe themselves out for less. Good is just PR for whoever wins the argument." Morty frowns. "That's not what I mean. I mean, when you look at them, the Vindicators, the people we meet, they all think they're saving the world. But they look miserable. And you—" He hesitates. "You look worse." Rick finally looks at him. Not sharply, not annoyed, just looks. Like he's searching for something in Morty's face and can't find it anymore. "Morty," he says quietly, "I'm not miserable because of what I do. I'm miserable because I know why I do it." Morty blinks. "What's that mean?" Rick leans back, his head resting against the cold metal wall. His voice softens, almost a whisper. "You save people long enough, and you start to realize something. Nobody ever stays saved. You fix one problem, another grows out of it. You stop one apocalypse, two more get in line. It's like trying to clean the ocean with a napkin." Morty stares at the floor. The soft blue lights of the console ripple across the metal like reflections on water. He doesn't understand everything Rick says, but he feels it. The ache in it. "Then why keep doing it?" he asks. Rick chuckles weakly. "Habit, guilt, maybe boredom. Take your pick." The sound fades into quiet again, the kind that presses against your ribs and makes your heartbeat sound too loud. Morty gets up and walks to the viewport beside Rick. The stars look close enough to touch, but far enough to make the soul ache. "I used to think being smart was supposed to make life easier," he says softly. "But every time you figure something out, it just makes everything feel smaller, colder." Rick glances at him. There's something new in his expression, not the usual smugness or sarcasm. "It's almost pride, but sad. That's the trick, Morty," he murmurs. "The more you know, the less there is to believe in." They sit there for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. The hum of the ship sounds like breathing. Somewhere in the distance a light flickers. Maybe another system failing, or maybe just the stars pretending to blink. Morty rests his chin on his knees. "Do you ever think about the people we used to travel with? Like Bird Person, or that girl who helped us on Pluto?" Rick's face doesn't move, but his hand tightens around the flask he isn't drinking from. "Yeah," he says finally. "Thinking about people is easy. It's the remembering that hurts." Morty doesn't reply. There's nothing left to say. The space between them feels heavy, but not hostile, just full. Full of the things they've done and can't undo. After a long time, Rick speaks again quietly. You're not supposed to see this side of things, Morty. Kids aren't built for it. You're supposed to believe in good guys, bad guys, and happy endings. The rest," he sighs, "the rest just keeps you awake at night." Morty stares at the reflection of himself in the glass. Small, tired, surrounded by stars he doesn't understand. "I don't think anyone sleeps easy anymore." Rick looks at him, and for the first time that night, smiles. Not the cocky, lopsided grin, but something softer, sadder. "That's probably the smartest thing you've ever said." They sit in silence again, the kind that feels almost holy. Minutes pass, maybe hours. Time is hard to measure in places that never have mornings. Eventually, Morty drifts toward the console and switches off the main lights. Only the stars remain, shimmering faintly against the glass. The room becomes a small pocket of dark blue and silver. Rick speaks again, almost to himself. You ever look out there and wonder if any of it remembers you? The planets, the people, the things we've done? Morty turns his head slightly. I don't think the universe forgets anything. I think it just forgives slower than we do. Rick chuckles, a low, broken sound. That's not forgiveness, Morty, that's entropy. But Morty doesn't argue. He just watches the stars, infinite, silent, patient. For a long while, nothing happens. No alarms, no missions. No need to save anyone. Just two people, caught somewhere between guilt and peace, floating through the dark. Morty eventually drifts off in his chair. His breathing slows. His head tilts against the console. The soft rhythm of sleep joins the hum of the ship, and the universe feels almost kind again. Rick looks at him, the faintest trace of tenderness in his eyes. He reaches out, gently adjusts the boy's blanket so it covers his shoulder. Then he sits back, unscrews his flask and pours the contents quietly onto the floor. Yeah, he mutters to no one. Maybe that's enough for tonight. He leans his head back, closes his eyes. For once he doesn't dream of explosions or equations or endings. Just silence, and the sound of his grandson breathing beside him. Outside, the stars keep their promise. They don't move, don't speak, don't judge. They simply glow, steady and small, like the quiet heartbeat of everything still trying to be good. And the ship drifts on gently. Through the long blue night, it starts with a soft hum. The kind that happens when a ship drifts through silence too long and begins to sing to itself. The crew of broken heroes gathers in the common room. Lights dimmed. Gravity just heavy enough to make the glasses clink when they meet. Outside, the stars hover in their slow dance, pretending to be distant candles. There's no celebration, not really. Just ritual. The kind of ritual you perform when you've run out of reasons to fight, but can't quite admit it. One by one they arrive. Supernova with eyes that flicker like dying comets. Vance Maximus polishing a glass that never seems to get clean. Crocubot whirring softly, trying to simulate what mood lighting means, and Rick. Rick walks in last, already holding a bottle that hums faintly, the label half burned off. Morty sits at the far end of the table, watching them. The faces are familiar, but there's a strange emptiness behind each expression, like the outlines of constellations after the stars have moved on. Rick raises his bottle without ceremony. To the galaxy's favorite narcissists, he says, voice low, steady, tired. May our egos outlive our usefulness. A few of them chuckle softly, as if remembering how laughter used to feel. Supernova smirks and lifts her drink. To saving worlds we never understood. Crocubot's mechanical hand stirs the liquid in his glass. To logic, he adds flatly, and the emotional chaos that follows it. Morty doesn't raise his cup. He just looks down, tracing the condensation with his finger. He wonders if heroes are supposed to sound this defeated. If people who save planets are allowed to feel so small. The light above the table flickers. It casts long, gentle shadows that sway over their faces like ghostly curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a system hums back to life. Rick leans forward. Do you know what the problem with hero teams is? His words slur slightly. Not from the alcohol, but from fatigue. You start believing your own propaganda. You stop seeing the dirt under your nails, the blood on your suits. You forget you're just people who got lucky once. Vance Maximus smirks, says the guy who literally rewrites physics when he's bored. Rick waves a hand lazily. Boredom's a valid scientific motive. The group laughs, and softly, almost sincerely. The sound doesn't fill the room, but it reaches Morty's chest like a fading warmth. He likes it when Rick sounds human, when the jokes come out quieter. Supernova glances around, her voice a thin thread in the dimness. Remember our first mission? She says. That asteroid colony with the blue trees. Rick grins faintly. Yeah, you all argued for hours about whether the locals were sentient. I built a translator, asked them myself. They just wanted us to leave. Maybe they were the smart ones, Morty murmurs. The group goes quiet. For a moment, nobody moves. The silence that follows isn't awkward. It's familiar. It's what happens when people who've seen too much remember what they lost between the victories. Supernova looks at Morty with a small, tired smile. You've got your grandfather's eyes, she says. That same haunted brightness. Careful, it's a curse. Rick snorts softly, pouring himself another drink. It's not a curse. It's a hobby. Morty doesn't answer. He just watches the reflections ripple in the glass, the faces bending and breaking in the surface like memories trying to stay afloat. Someone starts playing a recording from an old console, an ancient Earth song, slightly distorted by static. The melody is slow, wistful, something about home and stars. None of them know the words, but they hum along anyway. Rick leans back in his chair, eyes half closed. The bottle rests on the table, half empty, glowing faintly green from some untraceable chemical reaction. "You know," he says, his tone almost thoughtful, "when you're young you think adventure means running away. Turns out it's just another way of coming back to the same mistakes with better lighting." Morty tilts his head. "Then why keep going?" Rick looks at him, a long, searching look that almost feels like an apology. "Because sometimes, Morty, the mistakes are the only things that make sense." Outside the viewport, a comet passes by, slow, luminous, trailing dust like falling feathers. The light spills softly through the glass, brushing across their faces. It's the kind of light that makes everyone look younger for just a second. Supernova raises her glass again, her eyes soft. "To the people we couldn't save," she says quietly. Rick nods. "And to the ones who saved us anyway without even knowing it." They drink in silence. The sound of the liquid hitting the glass feels like rain, gentle, rhythmic, endless. Morty watches them one by one, these people who once called themselves heroes. He sees the cracks beneath their armor, the fatigue hidden under their jokes. And he thinks, maybe that's what makes them human. Not their powers, not their missions. But this moment, the stillness between one disaster and the next, the fragile peace of admitting you're tired, the lights dim further. The music fades into static. One by one they drift into their own quiet spaces. Supernova stares out the window humming. Vance falls asleep at the table, his head resting on his arm. Crocubot powers down with a soft mechanical sigh. Rick remains seated staring at nothing. His expression is unreadable, somewhere between nostalgia and regret. Morty approaches slowly, unsure if he should say anything. Finally he whispers, "You okay, Rick?" Rick blinks as if coming back from a long distance. "Morty," he says, voice almost gentle, "you ever notice how everything feels like a goodbye lately?" Morty frowns. "What do you mean?" Rick takes a long breath. "Every time we stop moving, it's like the universe is holding its breath. Like it's waiting for us to admit we're done pretending to be invincible." Morty doesn't know how to answer, so he just sits beside him. Together they watch the stars. Quiet, endless, indifferent. After a while, Rick lifts his glass again. "One last toast," he says softly. "To the past, the only place where we ever made sense." Morty hesitates, then clinks his glass gently against Rick's. The sound rings faintly, like the chime of an old clock at midnight. They drink in silence. The world outside keeps spinning. And for a brief, fragile moment, the room feels almost like home. Rick sets his glass down, closes his eyes, and murmurs something that Morty can barely hear. Maybe it's a formula. Maybe it's an apology. Maybe it's both. The stars pulse faintly in response, like they're listening. The ship drifts onward, steady and slow, carrying its passengers through another sleepless night. When Morty opened his eyes, the lights of the ship were dim and strange, flickering like stars that couldn't quite decide whether to shine or fade. The air felt too quiet. The Vindicators' laughter from the night before had turned into a low hum of confusion. Somewhere in the distance, a door clicked and locked. Then another. And another. He sat up slowly. His head was foggy, the kind of heaviness that lingers after dreams that feel too close to real. Rick was gone. His chair empty, his flask turned over, a single drop of blue liquid trembling on the edge before falling onto the metal floor. Morty rubbed his eyes and whispered, "Rick?" But the ship didn't answer. Instead, the ceiling above flickered and came alive. A projection, grainy, glitching, unmistakably Rick, appeared with that half-smile that never meant good news. "Good morning, geniuses," the hologram said, his voice too cheerful. "If you're watching this, it means I got bored and decided to test the limits of your self-importance again. Don't worry, it's not a trap. Not really, it's a mirror." The crew exchanged looks. The Vindicators, or what was left of them, shifted uncomfortably. Supernova crossed her arms, her glow dimmer than usual. "He's drunk again," she muttered, but her voice didn't sound angry. Just tired, Morty stayed quiet. He watched Rick's flickering image, every word echoing softer than it should. There was something about his tone, not quite his usual mockery, not quite care, something in between. Something lost. Rick's hologram continued. You'll find the doors sealed. You'll find puzzles. Don't rush. The goal isn't to win. It's to notice, he smirked, eyes glassy. Try that for once. Then the recording faded, leaving only the hum of the ship, a low mechanical sigh that filled the space between them like breath. The Vindicators moved through the corridors carefully. The ship, once sleek and bright, now felt like a memory of itself. Metal corridors curved like ribs, shadows breathing in rhythm with the engines. Every door they passed seemed to hold its own heartbeat. Morty trailed behind them, his footsteps soft, his thoughts quieter still. He looked at the walls, faint symbols glowing where Rick's graffiti used to be. Equations, sketches, and strange little notes scrawled in luminous ink. What are you saving? Who are you saving it for? He didn't understand them all, but he felt them. They weren't riddles. They were questions. The group reached the central chamber, the command deck now sealed by a translucent energy field. A faint hum pulsed from it, as if the ship itself were waiting to see who would speak first. The floor glowed faintly beneath their feet, forming circles that shifted with their steps, measuring, watching, remembering. Vance approached first, puffing out his chest like a hero in a comic panel. Classic Rick, he said. He's trying to mess with us. Probably wants us to beg him to let us out. But as he stepped closer, the circle under him changed color, from calm blue to trembling red, and a soft female voice spoke from nowhere. Dishonesty detected. Everyone froze. Vance stumbled back, his bravado cracking for just a second. That's not funny. Morty took a step forward, curiosity outweighing fear. The voice didn't speak again, only hummed gently, waiting. He knelt down, pressing his hand against the glowing floor. It was warm, not like a machine, but like a living thing. For a moment, he imagined the ship had a heartbeat, and maybe in some strange way it did. The Vindicators began moving from room to room, each door opening not with buttons or codes, but with feelings. When someone grew calm, lights turned green. When someone lied, they turned red. And when someone spoke with real truth, painful, trembling, honest, the ship seemed to breathe again. Supernova leaned against the wall, her glow pulsing in frustration. This isn't a puzzle, she said. It's therapy. Morty smiled faintly. Maybe that's the point. They passed a long hall lined with panels of shifting starlight. Each one showed faint reflections of themselves, not clear mirrors but vague silhouettes. Sometimes the reflections moved even when they didn't. In one, Morty saw Rick, or maybe a version of him, watching silently from the other side, his face unreadable. When the others went ahead, Morty stayed back a moment. He looked at his reflection again. It looked tired, older, but peaceful. Why are you doing this, Rick? He whispered, his voice barely a sound. What are you trying to show them? The reflection didn't answer, but it smiled. A small, knowing smile, the kind Rick used to give right before saying something that would change everything. The corridors twisted on, quiet as dream tunnels. Every few steps a soft chime echoed, a tone so gentle it made the heart slow down. Morty noticed how his breathing began to match it. The ship's hum, the lights, his pulse, all falling into rhythm. One by one, the Vindicators' voices grew softer too. The anger melted, the arrogance dimmed. They began whispering, then simply walking, heads bowed, lost in thoughts they'd long avoided. The puzzles weren't about survival. They were about seeing themselves, stripped of costumes, of missions, of applause, hours or minutes when it passed. Time inside the ship had started to lose its edges. Even Morty felt the boundaries between sleep and waking blur. At one point, he thought he saw Rick sitting in the corner of a corridor, quietly tinkering with a small cube. But when he blinked, the seat was empty again, a faint smell of alcohol and ozone in the air. The final door they reached had no handles, no screens, no locks. Just a single message written across it in Rick's messy handwriting. The hardest door to open is the one that's not locked. They stood in silence. No one spoke. The ship's hum faded until it felt like they were floating in a void. Morty closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Maybe we're not supposed to do anything, he said softly. Maybe we're just supposed to wait. And so they did. For a long time there was only stillness. The ship drifted through the dying light of the sun, silent and weightless. Somewhere far away the engines pulsed once like a heartbeat. Then the lights dimmed, not in warning but in peace. The narrator's voice, if there had been one, would have whispered gently, "Sometimes the truest puzzles are the ones that don't want solving. Sometimes the answer is to stop fighting and just listen, to the ship, to the silence, to yourself." Morty leaned his head against the cold metal wall. His eyes closed. The hum of the ship became softer, slower. For the first time since the signal came, he wasn't afraid. The universe, it seemed, was finally taking a breath. And somewhere, faintly Rick's voice echoed again, quiet, amused, almost kind. "Good job, Morty, you noticed." The corridors of the ship had gone quiet, not the kind of silence that comes from emptiness, but the silence that follows a realization. It was as though the ship itself had grown tired of speaking and wanted them to listen instead. The Vindicators moved slowly now, their steps softer, their faces thoughtful. Every door that opened no longer led to puzzles or traps, but to reflections of memory. Morty walked at the back of the group, eyes wandering over the walls that shimmered faintly with ghostly light. The metal surfaces rippled like water, showing glimpses of faces that didn't belong there. People from the past, laughing, fighting, fading. He blinked and they were gone. Supernova stopped at the next door. Her hand hovered over the panel, her glow flickering like a heartbeat. "This one feels different," she said. The door opened with a soft sigh. The room beyond was circular, its floor glowing with soft blue light. In the center hovered a sphere of liquid starlight, slowly rotating, reflecting each of them in its gentle glow. The voice of the ship, or maybe Rick's creation, spoke faintly, almost tenderly. "Room of ego, step forward one at a time." Vance went first, of course. His cape trailed behind him, dramatic even in the half-dark. As he approached the sphere, his reflection split. One version of him still walking confident and proud, the other smaller, uncertain, eyes darting toward the shadows. The light pulsed and the reflection spoke in his voice, but gentler. "Do you remember why you became a hero?" Vance's real self scoffed. "To protect people. To make a difference." The reflection tilted its head. "Or to be loved." He froze. For a long moment he didn't speak. The silence stretched, heavy but not cruel. Then the reflection faded, and the ship's voice murmured, "Acknowledged." He stepped back, quieter than before. Supernova went next. As she stepped forward, her light filled the chamber, wrapping the sphere in warm gold. Her reflection appeared too, radiant, flawless, but crying. She stared at it, her lips trembling. "This isn't fair," she whispered. Her reflection smiled sadly. "There's not supposed to be." Morty watched from the side, his heart heavy. Every reflection wasn't punishment. It was a kind of truth-telling, gentle, patient, unrelenting. The room didn't judge. It revealed. One by one, the Vindicators faced their reflections. Some wept, some laughed in disbelief, some said nothing at all. When it was Morty's turn, the others stepped aside. He took a breath and walked toward the light. The sphere shifted, the glow dimming until it matched the faint pulse of his heart. His reflection appeared, smaller, younger, eyes full of worry and wonder. The boy he used to be. The reflection smiled faintly. "You still think being good means following someone stronger?" Morty swallowed. I don't know what else to do." The reflection tilted its head the way Rick sometimes did. "Maybe stop doing and start being." Morty blinked. "Being what?" "Yourself." The light rippled once more, then faded. Morty stepped back, feeling both lighter and lonelier. Supernova touched his shoulder gently. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, just tired." The ship's voice spoke again, soft as a lullaby. Ego processed. "Proceed with truth." The lights dimmed and a door at the far end of the chamber slid open. Beyond it lay another hall, but this one was different. It wasn't made of metal or glass, and it looked like memory. The walls shimmered with images of past missions, laughter, failures, broken promises. Every surface glowed faintly with the ghosts of who they were. Morty felt it in his chest, that ache of remembering too much. The Vindicators walked through the hall slowly, touching the walls as if to confirm the memories were real. They saw faces of friends long gone, victories that meant nothing now, and smiles that looked forced even then. Supernova whispered, "This ship, It's not haunted by the dead. It's haunted by who we pretend it to be. Morty nodded. Rick knew that. That's why he built this. She looked at him sharply. You think this is Rick's doing? Morty's voice was quiet. Yeah, but not to hurt you. To show you something. Maybe to show himself too. They stopped in front of a wide viewport. Outside, the dying sun burned low and red, its light spilling through the room in soft amber waves. Dust drifted like stardust through the air, catching the glow. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. Vance sighed, setting down his weapon. You know, I used to think we were the best thing that ever happened to the galaxy. Supernova smiled sadly. Maybe we were, for a while. Morty stared at the light, voice small. Or maybe the galaxy just needed someone to care, even for a little bit. No one answered. They just stood there, bathed in fading sunlight, the ghosts of ego quietly dissolving around them. After a while, Morty sat on the floor, resting his back against the wall. He looked up at the stars, his thoughts drifting like quiet music. He wondered if Rick was watching somewhere, through the cameras, through the ship, through everything. He wondered if Rick cared about what they'd found here, or if this was just another one of his experiments on human emotion. But deep down, he felt something different, something almost kind. Maybe Rick didn't need them to win the game. Maybe he just wanted them to stop pretending. The hum of the ship grew softer, slower, like a heartbeat winding down for the night. The lights dimmed to twilight tones, navy and violet, peaceful and still. The Vindicators found places to rest. Supernova lay down on the floor, her glow fading to a faint halo around her head. Morty closed his eyes, listening to the hum, the quiet breathing of the others, the fading sound of a dying star. He thought about what his reflection said, about being, not doing. The words echoed softly in his mind until they became rhythm, then memory, then dream. Somewhere far away, maybe even outside time, Rick watched them through the flicker of a screen. His hand hovered over the control to end the simulation, but he didn't press it. He just stared for a long time, then whispered into the empty lab, "Good job, kid." The ship drifted through the endless dark, carrying them like a lullaby through space. And the ghosts, the ones born of ego, pride, and pain, finally began to fade. When the ship grew still again, the Vindicators slept. Supernova's light dimmed into a soft pulse, like a nightlight left on for a child. Even the hum of the engines had softened, like the ship itself was breathing slower now, calm, tired, alive. Morty didn't sleep. He sat beside a small viewport, knees to his chest, staring out into the quiet dark. The stars outside drifted past in slow spirals, like snowflakes that had forgotten where to land. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was heavy but gentle. He could still hear the echoes of the last chamber, the voices, the reflections, the truths no one wanted to face. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about escaping or fixing anything. He was thinking about why. Why Rick built all this, why the Vindicators came back, why people like them always needed to prove something. He thought about Rick, not the mad scientist who yelled at gods and laughed at death, but the man who fell asleep in his chair when no one was watching. The man who sometimes stared at the stars too long and forgot what he was looking for. Morty sighed softly. His breath fogged the glass. "You know," he whispered to no one, "I think he just wanted to see what we'd do without him." Behind him, one of the Vindicators stirred. Vance, his face half buried in his cape. "What's that, kid?" he mumbled. Morty turned, his voice small. "Rick, I think this was never about beating him. It was about us. About him. About truth." Vance blinked slowly, then chuckled. "You sound like a therapist." "Maybe," Morty said with a small smile. "But maybe that's what this all is. Therapy for people who don't think they need it." Vance didn't answer. He drifted back to sleep, leaving Morty alone again with the stars. He rested his forehead against the window. The metal was cool, almost comforting. "Rick's not trying to kill you," he whispered. "He's trying to show you what's already killing you." The stars outside shifted as the ship moved through the void. Morty imagined they were passing through memories, drifting between moments in time, a cosmic river of everything they'd been and everything they'd lost. He remembered the way Rick laughed during adventures, wild and fearless. He remembered the times Rick saved him without admitting it, and the nights he heard him crying quietly in the garage. It all felt like a dream now, fragments of something too complicated to name. Morty thought of the reflections they'd faced, and how each person's greatest enemy wasn't a villain, but themselves. He understood now. Rick's game wasn't revenge. It was a mirror, a slow, painful way to force them, all of them, to look at their own stories from the outside. He thought of his own reflection from earlier, the younger version of himself that told him to stop doing and start being. He didn't fully understand what that meant yet, but he felt closer to it now. Maybe it was about acceptance, about not trying to fix everything. The corridor lights dimmed further, and Morty heard soft footsteps. Supernova appeared, her glow faint as candlelight. She knelt beside him, her eyes reflecting the stars. "You're still awake," she said gently. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured. "Too much thinking," she smiled faintly. "Thinking isn't bad." "Yeah, but I don't think I'm built for this kind of thinking." Supernova chuckled quietly. "None of us are." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars together. There was something healing about it, the shared stillness, the quiet understanding between two people who didn't need to speak to feel seen. After a while, Morty asked, "Do you think Rick's evil?" She hesitated. The light from her eyes shimmered faintly. "I think Rick is broken in ways that make him look evil, but maybe he just feels too much." Morty nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what I was thinking too." Supernova leaned back against the wall, arms folded. "You know what I realized, Morty? We all came here thinking we'd prove something. Prove we were still heroes. But maybe heroes don't need to prove anything." Morty looked at her. "So what do?" She smiled softly. "They learn. They forgive. They rest." The words lingered in the air, warm and kind. Morty felt something loosen in his chest, the kind of quiet release that comes before sleep. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the ship lull him. He thought about all the adventures, all the chaos, all the times he'd begged Rick to slow down. Maybe this silence, this strange calm, was what he'd been asking for all along. When he opened his eyes again, Supernova had fallen asleep sitting up, her glow dimmed to a soft aura. Morty smiled faintly. He reached into his pocket and found a small metal fragment, something he'd picked up from the chamber earlier. He turned it over in his hand. It looked like part of Rick's old portal gun casing. He wondered if Rick had left it there on purpose, a reminder that even the smartest man in the universe was still human enough to leave pieces of himself behind. Morty placed the fragment on the floor beside him, like an offering, and whispered, "Good night, Rick." He leaned his head against the glass, watching as a distant planet passed by, a swirl of blue and gold clouds that looked almost like home. His eyes grew heavy. For the first time in what felt like forever, Morty felt safe. Not because he was protected, but because he understood. He understood that Rick wasn't trying to destroy anyone. He was teaching them something no adventure could. The art of stillness. The courage to stop running. As Morty drifted closer to sleep, the ship hummed a soft melody, mechanical yet oddly human. The stars seemed to hum along. The whole universe, for that one quiet moment, felt like it was breathing with him. Somewhere in another timeline, maybe in another dream, Rick sat alone in his lab, staring at an empty bottle he didn't open. He looked up at the monitor showing the Vindicators asleep. For a moment he smiled, not the cruel, smug grin the world knew, but a tired, proud smile, like a father watching his child finally find peace. "Good job, Morty," he whispered. The stars outside flickered once, then dimmed into deeper blue. The ship drifted onward through the silence, carrying everyone toward a rest they didn't know they needed. And in that quiet, Morty's understanding wasn't loud or brilliant. It was small, human, and enough. The ship moved quietly through the blackness of space, carrying its survivors deeper into the unknown. A soft hum echoed through the corridors like a lullaby made of electricity. Morty stirred awake, his head still resting against the glass. The stars outside hadn't changed, but something in the air had. The silence felt different now, not empty, but waiting. He stood slowly, stretching, his reflection faint in the window. Behind him, the others were still asleep, the dim light painting their faces in pale blue. He looked at them for a long time. Heroes, he thought, but tired ones, worn down, cracked at the edges, haunted by the things they had tried to forget. As Morty turned toward the next corridor, he noticed a faint light flickering down the hall. A pulse, slow, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. His curiosity tugged at him again, quiet but irresistible. He followed it. The light led him to a sealed door, different from the rest. Metal scorched, surface carved with strange equations that twisted and broke halfway through. It looked like something Rick would have built in a hurry, back when he still believed he could fix the world. Morty touched the panel. It hissed open, releasing a breath of cold air that smelled faintly of dust and ozone. Inside was a small room. Not a lab, not a chamber of traps or mirrors like before. Just a room. The walls were lined with old monitors, most of them dead, a few flickering with static. On a table sat a single cracked helmet, sleek, silver, with a faded V carved into its front, and beside it, a photograph. Morty stepped closer. The photo showed the Vindicators, younger, alive, smiling. Rick stood among them, his face half hidden behind a bottle, pretending not to care. But he was there. He had once stood with them before everything fell apart. Morty picked up the photo. The edges were burned, but he could still make out their eyes, the way they looked at Rick like he was one of them, like he mattered. He whispered to himself, "You were their friend once, huh?" The air shifted, and a voice replied, faint, mechanical, echoing from the corner of the room. "He was more than that." Morty froze. "Who's there?" A figure flickered into view, a hologram glitching, flickering between colors. It was Alan Rails, or what was left of him. "Don't be afraid," the projection said softly. "I'm just a recording. Rick left me here, or maybe I left myself." Morty blinked. "You're one of the Vindicators who died." Alan smiled sadly. "Yeah, and I guess that's what makes me the forgotten one." He walked, or pretended to walk, toward the table. "This was our first mission together. Back before the fame, before the egos, we thought we were saving galaxies. Turns out we were just saving our pride." Morty set the photo down. "Rick was part of that?" Alan nodded. "He was the reason we survived half the time. But you know Rick, can't stand being part of anything for too long. The moment people start to believe in him, he breaks it apart." He looked at Morty, eyes dim with digital static. "You've seen it, haven't you? The way he destroys what he builds." Morty hesitated. "Yeah, but I think he's just scared of losing it." Alan smiled faintly. "Smart kid." The projection flickered again, lines breaking across his form. "I stayed behind to remember what we were. Rick, he left this room locked because he couldn't face it anymore. Every time he made something good, he turned it into a test. A game, a punishment." Morty looked around the room. On one of the broken monitors, faint text blinked. "Memory loop, cycle 427, he whispered. "He's been replaying this." Alan nodded. "Yeah, over and over. Trying to see if it could end differently. But it never does." Morty felt a chill crawl down his spine. "He keeps watching his mistakes." "Because they're the only things that make him feel real," Alan said. "Genius isn't the same as healing, Morty. Rick can build anything. Except peace." The words hung heavy in the cold air. Morty sat down beside the table, staring at the photograph again. The faces of the heroes seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "If he couldn't save you," he whispered, "maybe he's trying to save himself." Alan's hologram flickered brighter for a moment, almost smiling. "Maybe that's what you're here for." Morty looked up. "Me? You still believe in him," Alan said. "That's rarer than any invention he's made." Morty wanted to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he looked down at his hands, small, human, shaking just a little. "I don't know if I do," he finally said. "But I want to." The hologram started to fade. That's enough. The room dimmed again. The monitors went dark one by one, until only the faint hum of the ship remained. Morty stood in the darkness, the silence pressing in around him. He took the photograph and the cracked helmet, tucking them carefully under his arm. Before leaving, he whispered into the still air, "I won't forget you." As the door closed behind him, he could have sworn he heard a faint voice, Alan's, whisper back, "That's all we ever wanted." Morty walked back down the corridor, his footsteps quiet but sure. The ship felt different now, like it was listening. The walls no longer echoed loneliness, but memory. Every creak and hum carried a story, and Morty could feel them all. Echoes of laughter, arguments, triumphs, and loss. He passed the sleeping Vindicators and stopped beside Supernova. For a moment he watched her breathe, slow, peaceful. Then he placed the photograph and the helmet beside her. "You should have these," he whispered. "They were yours before any of this." She stirred slightly but didn't wake. Morty smiled softly and turned away. As he walked back toward the viewport, the stars seemed closer now, brighter, warmer. Maybe that's what remembering does, he thought. It doesn't change the past. It just makes the dark a little less empty. He pressed his hand to the glass, feeling the cold against his palm. Somewhere far beyond the stars, Rick was still watching, still building, still breaking, still trying to understand himself through the people he left behind. And Morty, for the first time, didn't feel angry about it. He felt patient. He looked out at the stars, whispered, "You're not forgotten either." "Rick," and closed his eyes. The ship drifted onward through the quiet cosmos, carrying its memories like ghosts, its crew like dreams that refused to fade. The ship had grown quieter. The air felt older now, like the walls themselves were remembering. Morty moved through the corridor with the kind of stillness that comes when fear has turned into understanding. Somewhere behind him, faint mechanical clicks echoed, like the heartbeat of something half alive. He stopped when he reached the command deck, a dome-shaped room with cracked screens and a long, curved window that opened to a sea of stars. Dust floated through the air like slow-moving constellations. In the middle of the room stood a small device, a cylinder with a red blinking light. Morty recognized it instantly. Rick's voice recorder. He swallowed hard, stepping closer. There was a small note taped to it, written in Rick's messy handwriting. "Play if you made it this far, Morty, or don't. Whatever, I'm not your boss." Morty hesitated. He could already imagine what kind of message Rick would leave. Sarcastic, cruel, detached. But curiosity, that same gentle poison, made him press the button. A faint hum filled the room, and then Rick's voice came through, rough, low, slightly slurred. "Okay. Hey, assholes. If you're hearing this, it means you somehow survived long enough to trigger the failsafe. Congratulations. You've outlived your usefulness." Morty rolled his eyes. "Classic," he whispered under his breath, but the voice continued and something in the tone shifted. "Here's the thing," Rick said, slower now. "You think I set this up to kill you. I didn't. You think this was revenge. It wasn't. It was an experiment." Static flickered, and then Rick's voice softened again. "Not that kind of experiment, Morty. Don't get excited. It's more like a test of entropy, of people, of what happens when you strip away the cape, the hero name, the applause. What's left when you're just you?" The recorder buzzed faintly. Morty sat down on the metal floor, crossing his legs like a kid at story time. He didn't interrupt, didn't talk back. For once, he just listened. Rick continued. "You see, everyone wants to be remembered as something. A hero, a genius, a savior. But nobody wants to face the version of themselves that doesn't fit that story. That's why the Vindicators failed. They loved being heroes more than they loved saving people." Morty frowned, the words sinking in like heavy rain. Rick let out a dry laugh, the kind that wasn't really laughter at all. "And me, I'm no better. I used to think if I could just prove how smart I was, the universe would finally make sense. But every answer just makes the question bigger. Every time I fix something, I break something else." A long pause followed, then a sigh, a very human sigh. "I built this ship as a metaphor. You're welcome for the literary depth, by the way. Every locked door, every dead end, they're not traps. They're therapy. Congratulations, you're all in my cosmic therapy session. Free of charge. Lucky you." Morty smiled faintly despite himself. That was Rick, unable to be serious for more than 30 seconds. "But here's the real joke," Rick said quietly. "You can't escape the maze because the maze is you. Your fears, your regrets, your lies, they're the corridors you built yourself. I'm just the guy who turned the lights on so you could see them. The room went still. Morty could hear his own heartbeat echoing faintly against the metal floor. Rick's voice grew softer, almost tender. Morty, if you're still alive, you probably hate me right now. That's fine. Honestly, it's healthier than loving me. But before you do something stupid like forgiving me, just listen. Morty's chest tightened. I'm not a villain. I'm just tired. You know what it's like to wake up every day knowing you could save the world, but also knowing it wouldn't matter. Because people don't want saving. They want distraction. They want myths. They want the illusion that someone else has it under control. Rick paused, the faint sound of him taking a drink echoing through the static. Every time I build something, it gets used for something worse. Every person I try to help either leaves or breaks. So I stopped pretending. I stopped playing the hero. It's easier that way. Morty leaned forward, whispering almost unconsciously, "That's not easier, Rick." The recording crackled again. "But you're different. You still care. You still think people can be better. You still think I can be better. And that's annoying, Morty. Deeply, profoundly annoying." Morty smiled, a tear forming in the corner of his eye. Rick's tone changed once more, soft but uneven, like he was struggling with the words. "But keep doing it anyway. Keep caring, even when it hurts, even when I tell you not to. Especially then. Because you're the only proof I've ever had that maybe our intelligence doesn't have to mean loneliness." The recorder went silent. For a moment, Morty thought it was over. He almost reached to turn it off when Rick's voice returned, quieter now, barely above a whisper. "There's one last thing, Morty. If you find this message, don't tell the others what I said. Let them think I'm the same old bastard. Someone's got to play the role, right? Someone's got to be the bad guy so the rest of you can sleep at night." The static deepened, and Rick's final words faded like dust on a breeze. "Good night, kid." The light on the recorder went dark. The room filled with silence again, but not an empty one. It was the kind of silence that comes after a confession, when the air itself feels heavier with truth. Morty sat there for a long time, staring at the blank recorder. His mind swirled with memories, adventures, arguments, drunken laughter. He thought about how Rick always seemed unstoppable, untouchable. But this voice, this message, it was fragile, human. He stood up slowly, his reflection shimmering faintly in the curved glass of the viewport. "You're not the bad guy," he whispered. "You're just tired." The stars outside blinked softly like tiny nods of agreement. Morty reached out and placed his hand against the cold glass. The faint hum of the ship pulsed beneath his fingers. For a moment it almost felt like the universe was breathing with him. He smiled sadly. "Good night, Rick." And with that he turned and walked away, leaving the dark room behind, but carrying the voice with him, like a whisper that would never quite fade. The hallway to the final chamber felt endless. The lights flickered like they were breathing, dimming with each pulse of the ship's dying power. Morty walked slowly, the soft echo of his footsteps blending with the distant hum of machinery. Behind him, the few remaining Vindicators followed in silence. No words, no arguments, just the quiet fatigue of people who had seen too much. They reached it at last, a circular door made of black alloy, smooth and seamless without a handle or code panel. It stood there like a shadow carved into the ship itself. No light reflected off it. It seemed to swallow every glow that came near. Rick had always said every puzzle had a trick, a flaw to exploit. But this door felt different. It didn't hum or blink or resist. It simply was. Morty pressed his hand to it, half expecting it to shock him. Nothing. Just the faint chill of metal, colder than the air around it. Supernova leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Is this another one of Rick's jokes?" she asked quietly. Morty didn't answer. He didn't think it was. He looked at the small console to the right, blank screen, dead circuits, the kind of silence that felt final. He tried tapping the side, typing random sequences, even whispering the passcodes Rick used when he wanted to be sentimental. Bird person, Unity, Beth. None worked. Finally, he just sat down beside the door. The others watched him uncertain, until one by one they joined him, not out of strategy but exhaustion. They sat together in a semicircle, the dim light painting soft halos around them. The hum of the ship faded into something almost musical, a steady vibration like a heartbeat far away. Morty rested his head against the wall. "Maybe it's not meant to open," he said, barely above a whisper. The others looked at him. For once, no one argued. Supernova closed her eyes, breathing slowly. "You think it's another test?" Morty shrugged. "Maybe, but I don't think it's about solving anything. I think Rick just wanted us to stop trying." The words hung in the air, gentle but heavy. Noob, sitting cross-legged nearby, sighed. "That's dumb, man. Doors are supposed to open." "That's what they do," Morty smiled faintly. "Yeah, and people are supposed to make sense. But sometimes they don't either." A long, peaceful silence followed. The lights flickered again, softer now. The sound of distant creaking metal echoed through the corridor, like the ship was stretching in its sleep. Morty closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw Rick, not the version who mocked everyone, but the quiet one from the recording. The one who had admitted he was tired. He whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe the door's waiting for us to stop pretending we know what's behind it." Supernova tilted her head. "And what's behind it?" "I don't know," Morty said. "Maybe nothing. Maybe peace. Maybe just an ending." The ship groaned, a long, low sound like a sigh. One of the panels above them sparked faintly, and for a brief moment, a small blue light flickered across the door's surface, almost like it had heard them. Morty didn't move. He didn't rush to decode it. He just watched the soft pulse of light as it shimmered once, then disappeared again. "It's weird," he said quietly. "Rick always makes things that are loud, complicated, messy. But this feels gentle." No one replied. Somewhere in the background, the ship's ventilation system began to fade, the air growing still. Morty felt his chest tighten for a second, the quiet pressing against him, and then release like the ship itself was exhaling. He spoke again, softly, like a thought escaping. "Maybe this isn't a door at all. Maybe it's just a wall, a way to tell us to stop searching." Supernova opened her eyes. "And do what instead?" Morty smiled faintly. "Rest." He leaned back, letting his head tilt against the cold metal. It felt surprisingly comforting, like leaning against something ancient that didn't need to explain itself. The others followed suit, one by one. Noob leaned against his knees, humming something under his breath. Supernova folded her arms and stared at the faint starlight flickering through a nearby viewport. Time slowed. The rhythm of their breathing aligned, like they were syncing with the heartbeat of the ship. Morty spoke again, his voice soft, almost fading into the hum. "Rick said the maze was us. Maybe the only way out is to stop fighting it. Maybe this is what he wanted, for us to just sit down and let the noise go." Supernova looked at him, and for the first time there was no resistance in her gaze, just quiet acceptance. "You think he's still watching us?" Morty thought for a long time before answering. "Yeah, probably, but maybe not to see if we win. Maybe to see if we finally stop trying to win." He smiled, eyes half closed. Rick never trusted peace, but maybe he wanted to. The lights above flickered again, brighter this time, not harsh but warm, the kind of glow that feels like morning sneaking through the window after a long night. For a fleeting moment, the black surface of the door shimmered. Lines appeared, forming a faint outline, not opening but revealing its reflection. Morty saw their faces faintly mirrored there, tired, quiet, alive. He reached out and touched it again. The surface was warmer now, almost pulsing with life. He whispered, "We're here." "That's enough." The hum deepened. A faint chime sounded, low and melodic, like the sound of wind through glass. And then nothing, stillness. The door didn't open. It didn't need to. Morty stayed there, eyes half closed, watching the faint glimmer of stars reflected in the metal. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't want to move forward. He didn't want answers. He just wanted quiet. The others drifted too, one by one into half-sleep. Not the deep rest of safety, but the soft kind that comes when your body finally gives up, pretending it's in control. Morty's thoughts drifted toward Rick again. He wondered if the old man was out there somewhere, watching, maybe even smiling in that stubborn, sideways way. "Good night, Rick," he murmured again. The hum of the ship replied, steady and slow, like a heartbeat fading into a dream. And for a little while, in that silent metal corridor beside the door that wouldn't open, they all finally stopped trying to be heroes. The corridor was still dim when Morty woke. The air tasted metallic and dry, like the ship had been holding its breath for too long. Around him the others were still asleep, scattered across the floor, their bodies outlined by the pale, flickering glow from the control panel above. For a moment, Morty didn't move. He just sat there, listening to the hum of the ship. It reminded him of a lullaby his mum used to hum when he was little, slow, steady, slightly off-key. It wasn't a song about victory or adventure. It was a song about staying, about surviving the night. Morty looked up at the door again, still sealed, still unreadable, yet something inside him felt different. He didn't feel frustrated anymore, just quiet. He thought about what he'd said before falling asleep, that maybe the door wasn't meant to open, that maybe it was there to remind them that not everything needed fixing. He stood stretching stiffly and wandered down the corridor. The air was cold enough that his breath fogged faintly in front of him. The ship groaned beneath his feet, the sound of a tired machine that had seen too many lifetimes. Then he saw it, a small maintenance closet he hadn't noticed before. The door was half open, lights flickering weakly inside. He stepped closer, expecting tools, maybe a fuse box. But instead he found something unexpected, a uniform. It hung neatly on a rusted hook. Dust floated around it like tiny planets orbiting a forgotten sun. The insignia was faded, almost erased by time, but Morty could still make out the faint outline of the Vindicators' emblem. He touched the sleeve gently. The fabric was soft, worn thin at the edges. Whoever this belonged to had worn it often, probably every day without thinking twice, and then beside it on a small shelf he noticed a name tag. Not engraved like the others, just a piece of tape written in marker, the letters barely legible. No one. Morty read it twice. Then again, slower, no one. He smiled, not because it was funny, but because it felt true. In that small, forgotten room, surrounded by the hum of a dying ship, he began to realize what Rick had been trying to say all along. Heroism wasn't about the name on your chest. It wasn't about who got remembered. It was about the quiet work, the kind that no one saw. He imagined the person who'd worn this uniform. Maybe they cleaned the floors after missions, patched up broken panels, fixed what others broke without expecting thanks. Someone who kept things running while everyone else fought for the spotlight. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. The Vindicators had always been loud, gods, warriors, saviors of worlds. But someone like this? Someone named No One. They were the reason everything still worked. Morty closed his eyes. For a moment he could almost see them. A shadow walking through the corridors late at night, wiping blood off the walls, humming to themselves as they made sure the lights would still turn on tomorrow. No speeches, no glory, just quiet care. He thought of the janitor back at the Smith house, the one who used to clean the school after hours. Morty had once stayed late for detention and saw him mopping the hallway alone, humming the same verse over and over. The world spins slower when no one's watching. Maybe that's what this person had believed too. That peace wasn't built by heroes. It was maintained by the ones who kept showing up after everyone else left. Morty looked down at the patch again. No one, he whispered. Yeah, maybe that's the best kind of hero. He sat down on the floor beside the uniform. For a long time he didn't move. The hum of the ship filled the silence between thoughts, and for a brief moment, Morty felt something almost sacred. He imagined Rick walking into this same room, maybe years ago, maybe last night, and seeing the same uniform. What would he have thought? Probably nothing at first. Maybe he'd have scoffed, made some sarcastic comment about the insignificance of ordinary people. But deep down, Morty knew Rick respected them. The small ones. The quiet ones. The ones who didn't need to win to be right. He picked up the uniform carefully, shaking off the dust. Beneath it, folded neatly, was a small piece of paper. The edges were yellowed, the ink faint. He unfolded it slowly. It wasn't a message. Not exactly. Just a few words written in careful handwriting. You don't have to be seen to matter. Morty stared at it for a long time. The words blurred slightly as his eyes welled up. He smiled through it, that small, tired kind of smile you get when something hurts but also heals at the same time. He tucked the paper back where it belonged, smoothing it gently. Then he stood and turned off the flickering light. When he returned to the others, they were still sitting in front of the sealed door. Supernova looked up. Find anything? Morty nodded. Yeah, someone. Who? He hesitated for a second, then said softly, No one. The way he said it made her stop asking. They sat together again, quietly. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was tender, almost protective. Morty leaned back and looked toward the stars outside. They looked different now, softer, like they weren't just burning but breathing. He whispered to himself, Maybe that's the point, huh? You don't need to be a hero to matter, you just need to care. The ship hummed again, as if agreeing. Supernova closed her eyes, and for the first time her expression wasn't burdened. Maybe that's what Rick wanted us to learn. Morty nodded. Yeah, I think so. Time passed in that slow, dreamlike way it does when you finally stop trying to rush it. The stars outside drifted lazily past the viewport. The hum of the engines softened into something that almost sounded like a heartbeat. And for that brief, delicate moment, every one of them, the loud, the broken, the forgotten, felt seen, not by a camera, not by a world, but by each other. Morty glanced back once more at the sealed door. In the faint reflection, he thought he saw a shape standing beside him, faint, human, smiling quietly. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just whispered, Thank you. The shape seemed to nod, fading back into the shadows, leaving only the soft hum of the ship and the warmth of that single, fragile truth. Sometimes the real hero is the one no one remembers, and in that stillness, Morty realized something else too. Maybe Rick wasn't trying to punish them. Maybe he was trying to remind them of this, that the universe didn't need more heroes. It needed more kindness. The light above them flickered one last time, casting a gentle blue hue over the corridor. It looked almost like moonlight through clouds. Morty closed his eyes and breathed in, feeling the ship settle beneath him. For the first time since the mission began, he felt at peace, somewhere in the hum of the old machine. He thought he heard a faint whisper, not Rick's voice, not anyone's, just a simple phrase carried through the static. Keep going, even if no one sees you. Morty smiled. Yeah, he said softly. We will. And as the stars drifted by, the Vindicators, what was left of them, sat in silence, each quietly changed by the hero they never met. Rick sat alone in the engine bay. The lights around him pulsed faintly, like the ship itself was breathing. In his hand, an empty flask caught the low blue glow, reflecting tiny fragments of his face, one for every lie he'd told, one for every world he'd left behind. The ship's hum filled the silence, low and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something dying but too stubborn to stop. Rick stared at his reflection in the metal floor. The face that stared back looked tired. Not the usual kind of tired, but the kind that seeps into your bones when you've carried too much for too long. He muttered under his breath. Genius of the century, huh? Savior of universes, and still can't save a single person without screwing it up. He picked up the flask again, tilting it as if hoping some last drop might appear. It didn't. He laughed softly, a brittle sound. Figures. Then he looked up. The mirror across the room, a cracked, old, probably salvaged from some wreck, caught his eye. He stared at it, watching how his reflection broke into pieces through the fractures. In one shard he looked younger. In another, angry. In another, scared. Pick a version, Rick, he whispered. Which one's the real you? He could almost hear the mirror answering back, not with words but with silence. The kind that feels heavier than any voice. The ship's console flickered. A small holographic projection shimmered into existence, a diagnostic report. The voice was monotone, artificial, but somehow comforting in its predictability. Warning. Emotional variance detected. Suggest corrective routine, self-stabilization. Rick scoffed. You think I haven't tried that, sweetheart? Self-stabilization's a scam. The universe runs on chaos. I just learned to surf it. He stood up, pacing. You ever notice how no one wants a god who's honest about being broken? Nah, they want certainty. They want clean miracles and pretty speeches. I'm just the guy who fixes the machine behind the curtain, and when it blows up, everyone points and says, whoa, see? That's why you don't trust the drunk. His voice cracked slightly on that last word. He hated that it did. He turned to the wall where hundreds of tiny notes were pinned, equations, coordinates, fragments of half-finished inventions. Some of them were crossed out violently. Some had tear stains. He reached out and touched one, a scribbled note that simply said, Don't forget the kid. Morty. Rick sighed, rubbing his temples. God, he's getting too smart for his own good. He remembered the look Morty had given him before they split up. Not fear, not anger, but understanding. The kind of look that said, I get it now. That was the worst part. Morty was supposed to stay innocent, at least for a little while longer. But innocence had a short lifespan around him. Rick sat back down and looked again at the mirror. His reflection stared back, dozens of Ricks, fragmented and uneven. Maybe that's what a god really is, he said softly. Just a broken reflection that everyone keeps worshipping because they're too scared to look away. He chuckled bitterly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Cheers to that, huh? For a while he just sat there, letting the ship's soft hum fill the emptiness. Outside, stars drifted lazily by, too far away to care, too old to remember. Then he noticed something strange. One of the shards in the mirror wasn't reflecting him anymore. It was showing something else, a faint image, almost like a memory trying to crawl its way back into the present. He leaned closer. It was his garage, Earth, 37. A younger Morty stood there, holding a wrench awkwardly. Rick remembered this moment, the first time he'd let Morty fix something on his own. The machine had blown up 5 minutes later, but Morty's grin had stayed. Rick smiled at the memory. You were proud of yourself, weren't you, kid? Didn't even matter that it failed, you just wanted to help. He touched the mirror's surface, his fingers tracing the outline of Morty's tiny reflection. And I let you. The image flickered, then shifted. Now it showed Beth, his daughter, sitting on the porch with a glass of wine, staring at the stars. He remembered this too. She'd asked him quietly if he ever regretted leaving. He had lied. Told her no. The reflection looked at him now with disappointment that had never faded. Rick whispered, Yeah, maybe I should have said yes. The mirror pulsed faintly, as if reacting to his voice. Each shard began to glow softly, filling the dark room with fragments of blue light. He saw more memories now, flashes of Summer's laughter, Bird-Person's loyalty, Unity's calm voice saying goodbye. Each reflection was a reminder of what he'd lost, or worse, what he'd thrown away. He felt something stir inside his chest. Not guilt exactly, but the ache that follows it. The kind that doesn't go away no matter how many universes you run to. He closed his eyes. The ship hummed louder now, almost like it was breathing with him. Then the voice returned. The ship's AI, soft this time. Emotional stabilization achieved. Reflection acceptance sequence in progress. Rick laughed quietly. Reflection acceptance. Yeah, sure. Whatever helps you sleep at night. But deep down he knew the AI wasn't wrong. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't fighting what he saw. He wasn't trying to fix it. He looked into the mirror one last time. The shards had aligned slightly, forming something close to a hole. The cracks were still there, but now they glowed faintly, not hiding the breaks, but lighting them up. Rick whispered, Guess that's me. Not fixed, just functional enough. He stood looking out the viewport. Somewhere out there, Morty was still alive, still learning, still trying to be better than him. That thought, that fragile hope, was enough to steady his breath. He spoke softly to the stars. Don't screw it up, kid. Be better. Be the kind of person who doesn't need to break the universe to feel alive. The stars didn't answer, but their silence was kind, patient. Rick picked up the flask again, but this time he didn't drink. He just held it, feeling the weight of it in his hand. Then slowly, he set it down and turned off the lights. The mirror's faint glow lingered in the dark, the cracks shining like constellations. He whispered to himself, Maybe being a god isn't about creating. Maybe it's about surviving what you've created. And as he walked away, the reflection stayed behind, smiling faintly as if to say goodbye. Outside, the ship drifted through the infinite dark, its engines humming like a lullaby for a tired god. And somewhere inside that silence, the universe kept breathing and waiting, forgiving, holding its broken creators gently in the dark. For the first time in what felt like forever, no one was talking. The corridors of the ship glowed faintly, washed in pale blue light that pulsed in rhythm with their quiet breathing. Somewhere deep in the hull, metal sighed, a soft, weary exhale, like even the ship was tired of pretending to be alive. Morty sat cross-legged on the cold floor, his back resting against the curved wall. Across from him, a cracked control panel blinked lazily. He wasn't thinking about saving anyone anymore. He wasn't even thinking about winning. He was just being gone. Rick was a few feet away, slumped against a crate of tools. His eyes were half closed, a bottle dangling loosely from one hand. But the bottle had been empty for hours. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was gentle. Heavy but kind. The Vindicators, who were left not many now, sat in a circle without meaning to. No one dared to speak first. Maybe they were afraid that words would break whatever fragile peace had settled between them. Or maybe they just didn't have words left. Outside the viewport, space stretched endlessly. Stars blinked like slow heartbeats, flickering in and out of the dark. It looked almost peaceful, like the universe itself was pausing to listen. Morty finally whispered, "It's so quiet." Rick opened one eye, gave a small shrug. "Yeah, that's what happens when people stop lying." Morty smiled faintly. "You think that's what this is?" Rick didn't answer right away. He tilted his head, watching the stars drift. "It's what it feels like." Like the noise finally ran out. A small breeze, while recycled air humming through vents, brushed Morty's face. It smelled faintly of ozone and something like rain, though he knew it couldn't be. He imagined it anyway. The scent of wet earth back home, the way the air used to feel when summer storms rolled across the neighborhood. He missed that. He missed things that didn't matter. Cracked sidewalks to squeaky floors, the hum of the refrigerator at night. Funny how after everything it was those tiny sounds that felt like home. Rick muttered softly, "You know what I hate about space?" Morty blinked. "What?" "There's no sound. You can scream and it just disappears. No echo, no feedback. Just gone." Morty thought about that for a while. "Maybe that's not so bad," he said. "Some things don't need to come back." Rick looked at him for a long time, then chuckled quietly. "You're getting philosophical, kid. That's dangerous territory." Morty smiled, a little embarrassed. "Guess I've been listening to you too long." Rick's eyes softened, barely, but enough for Morty to notice. "Yeah, maybe." Silence settled again, a peaceful one this time. The kind that hums beneath your skin when you're too tired to keep fighting. Across the room, one of the surviving Vindicators, Crocubot, what was left of him anyway, blinked slowly. His robotic eye dimmed and brightened, casting faint reflections across the floor. "I do not dream," he said softly, almost like a confession, "but I simulate the feeling of missing something." "I believe that is the same." No one laughed. "No one needed to," Morty said. "Maybe dreaming's just the brain's way of remembering things it didn't have time for." Crocubot's mechanical eye flickered once. "Then I must have many dreams stored inside me." Rick smirked but didn't argue. The old him might have thrown a sarcastic jab, but now he just nodded. Somewhere above them a light flickered out. The corridor dimmed a little more. The narrator, if there was one, if anyone was even watching, might have said that this was the part where the heroes realize they're not really heroes at all. But in truth, this moment wasn't about realization. It was about rest. The calm between storms. The pause between heartbeats. Morty tilted his head back, watching the way the faint glow of starlight moved across the ceiling. He whispered mostly to himself, "You ever think maybe we're supposed to just sit sometimes? Not fix things, not fight things. Just sit." Rick didn't move. "Kid, if you're trying to talk me into meditation, you're about 1,000,000 light years too late." Morty chuckled, then grew quiet again. "Not meditation. Just silence, like letting things breathe," Rick sighed. "Things don't breathe, Morty. People do." "Yeah," Morty said softly. "And when they stop, maybe silence is what's left." The room seemed to absorb his words. The Vindicators, what little remained of them, shifted slightly, tired eyes looking at one another with something close to forgiveness. Maybe they didn't need to make sense of what happened. Maybe understanding wasn't the point. A long hum filled the air. It wasn't mechanical this time, more like the echo of something alive deep inside the ship's walls. It vibrated gently through the floor like a heartbeat that had found its rhythm again. Morty closed his eyes. For a moment, he imagined that the hum was Earth, the pulse of every home, every dream, every person who ever sat awake in the dark and wondered if they'd done enough. Rick glanced at him, noticed the slow rise and fall of his chest. "You're not falling asleep, are you?" Morty smiled, eyes still closed. "Maybe. I don't know. Kinda feels like the universe is humming a lullaby." Rick leaned his head back against the crate. "You're a weird kid." "Yeah," Morty murmured. "Guess I learned from the best." That got a faint laugh out of Rick, a small cracked sound that filled the air like music. No one spoke after that. The minutes stretched long and soft. The light dimmed to a deep ocean blue. Time lost its edges. It was strange. For a ship built for war, it felt almost peaceful now. Like all the fighting had drained out of it. Like it had decided that silence was the only honest thing left. Somewhere far below, the engines pulsed once, then settled into a steady rhythm. Morty's thoughts drifted. He imagined the stars outside weren't burning at all, just glowing softly, resting, dreaming their ancient dreams. Maybe even stars needed to stop shining sometimes. Maybe even they deserved a moment of peace. Rick's breathing slowed beside him. It wasn't sleep exactly, but close. A half-dreaming state, a truce with exhaustion. In the stillness, Morty whispered so quietly it almost wasn't sound at all. "Hey, Rick, you think the universe ever gets tired?" Rick didn't open his eyes. "Yeah," he murmured. "That's why it keeps expanding. Just trying to stretch out and rest." Morty smiled at that. "Good answer," Rick smirked faintly. "Only kind I've got left." Outside, a cluster of distant stars drifted past the window, painting faint streaks of silver light across their faces. For a moment it looked like they were glowing too. Tired heroes, caught between ruin and grace, lit by the same gentle fire as the heavens they'd once tried to control. And in that vast, quiet ocean of black, for one small heartbeat of time, everything was still. No running, no fighting, no pretending, just a silence between stars. And if anyone had been listening closely, really listening, they might have heard it whisper something simple, something ancient, something kind. Rest now, morning never comes in space. There's only the slow turning of light, the drifting shimmer of distant suns, and the quiet hum of machines pretending to be alive. When Morty woke, it wasn't because anything had changed. It was because something inside him finally did. He opened his eyes to the same dim corridor. The air still hummed gently, that same low note like the universe's heartbeat. Rick was sitting nearby, staring out the window. The bottle was gone. His hair was a little wilder than usual, shadows sinking deep beneath his eyes. For a while, Morty just watched him, the way the faint blue light touched his face, the way his expression shifted between thought and nothing. It felt strange seeing Rick like that. Not angry, not smug, just quiet, almost human. "Hey," Morty said softly, his voice breaking the silence like a ripple on still water. Rick didn't turn around. "Hey, kid." Morty rubbed his eyes and sat up. "How long have you been awake?" Rick gave a dry chuckle. "Awake? Morty, I don't think I've really been asleep in about 40 years. Morty smiled a little, but there was sadness in it. "Yeah, feels like that sometimes." For a while they didn't speak. The ship creaked softly, drifting through that endless ocean of starlight. Every sound, every hum, every faint vibration seemed amplified by the silence. Then Morty asked, "Rick, can I ask you something?" Rick still didn't move. "You just did," Morty sighed. "No, seriously." Rick finally turned his head, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, Morty, what's on your mind?" Morty hesitated. The words caught somewhere between his chest and throat, like a weight that didn't want to move. But he said them anyway, slow and steady. "Do you even want to be a hero?" The question hung in the air, soft but sharp, like a whisper wrapped around a blade. Rick blinked. He didn't laugh, didn't deflect. For once there was no joke ready. He just breathed out, long and heavy, eyes flicking back toward the stars. "What the hell's a hero, Morty?" Morty frowned. "You know what I mean, like someone who helps people, someone who makes things better." Rick snorted, but it wasn't cruel, just tired. "Morty, I've met gods. I've met people who bend time, rewrite life, erase death. You know what they all had in common?" Morty shook his head. They all thought they were helping. The words sat heavy between them. Morty looked down at his hands. "So you don't believe in heroes anymore?" Rick leaned his head back, eyes tracing the faint lines of light flickering across the ceiling. "Believe in them? Sure, I just don't think they ever win." Morty frowned. "That's kinda sad." Rick smiled faintly. "That's kinda life." Morty wanted to argue, but something in Rick's voice, what that raw, cracked honesty had, stopped him. The silence returned, gentle and thoughtful. After a while, Morty whispered, "When I was little, I used to think heroes never got scared." Rick laughed softly. "Kid, being scared's the only thing that proves you still care about something." Morty looked up. So what about you? What do you care about? Rick's eyes shifted toward him, tired but alive. For you ask a lot of dangerous questions for someone who wants to fall asleep, Morty. Morty smiled. Maybe that's why I can't. Rick stared at him a moment longer, then turned back to the stars. You want the truth? Morty nodded. Rick took a breath. I used to care about everything. Every atom. Every law of physics. Every way the universe could twist itself into a miracle. And then I realized miracles don't last as they just break slower than the rest. Morty said nothing. Rick added softer. Now I just care about keeping you alive. That's enough. Morty's throat tightened. He wanted to say thank you, but the words didn't fit. They'd sound too small next to something that big. So he just said, okay. They sat like that for a while, teacher and student. Grandfather and grandson, maybe just two lost souls caught in the same gravity. The stars outside shifted color, fading from silver to violet as they passed through another nebula. The light rippled gently over their faces, making the whole ship look underwater. Morty watched the glow play across Rick's expression and thought how strange it was. The universe kept moving even when you didn't want it to. Even when you needed it to stop. Rick? He asked after a while. Yeah, Morty. Do you ever get tired of being... To you, Rick chuckled, but quietly. Every damn day, kid. Every damn day. Morty leaned his head back against the wall. Then why keep going? Rick thought about that for a long time. Because stopping doesn't fix anything. You stop and the universe keeps spinning anyway. Might as well keep spinning with it. Morty closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of Rick's voice blend with the hum of the ship. It was almost hypnotic, like being told a story inside a dream. Maybe that's the closest thing to being a hero, Morty murmured. Not giving up. So even when everything else does, Rick glanced over. His expression softened. You really believe that? Morty smiled, eyes still shut. I kinda have to. Rick looked at him for a long time. Then, almost reluctantly, he nodded. Yeah, guess you do. The quiet stretched again. Outside, the nebula's glow thinned into a mist of distant light. Inside, the air felt warmer somehow, like the ship itself was listening. Rick finally spoke again, barely above a whisper. You know, Morty, sometimes I think the universe isn't some giant puzzle to solve. Maybe it's just one long nap we keep waking up from. Morty laughed softly, the sound half dream, half sigh. Yeah, maybe. Rick smiled. Go back to sleep, kid. The universe will still be here when you wake up. Morty's voice came out barely audible. Promise? Rick nodded once, though Morty didn't see it. Yeah, promise. The hum of the ship deepened. Lights dimmed to a soft twilight hue. The corridor became a cradle of silver shadows. Rick leaned his head back, eyes drifting shut. His last thought before sleep wasn't of equations or galaxies. It was of Morty's question. Simple, human, impossible. Do you even want to be a hero? He didn't have an answer, not yet. But for the first time in a long time, he wanted to try finding one. Outside, the stars whispered against the hull. Slow, distant, kind. The ship drifted onward through the dark, two small souls floating together in the silence between everything. And somewhere in that quiet, maybe the universe smiled. The next time Morty woke, he wasn't sure how long it had been. The stars looked different, colder somehow, sharper, like fragments of glass scattered through ink. The hum of the ship was slower, heavier, as if the whole vessel were tired of drifting. Rick was gone. Morty sat up, heart skipping a beat. The lights in the corridor were dim, flickering like candles in a storm. His voice came out small. Rick? No answer. Just the long, patient breathing of space. He got to his feet, feeling the pull of silence pressing around him. Every step echoed. It felt like walking through someone else's dream, one that was starting to fade. The air smelled faintly of metal and static. When he reached the control deck, he stopped. Rick was there, standing before the main viewport. Not moving, not speaking, just staring. The stars outside weren't stars anymore. They were shapes, twisting, spiraling threads of color folding in on themselves, like the universe was melting and rebuilding at the same time. Morty swallowed hard. Rick, what's happening? Rick didn't answer right away. He pressed a button on the console, and a soft hum filled the room. A thin slit of light appeared in front of them, vertical, bright, endless. Morty blinked. What is that? Rick finally spoke, voice low. That, Morty, is the truth door. Morty frowned. The what? Rick turned toward him, eyes reflecting that strange white glow. Every multiverse has one, a point where reality folds so tightly it shows you the only thing it can't hide. The truth. Morty stared at the door. The light wasn't just bright, it was alive. It pulsed like a heartbeat, humming at a frequency that made his bones feel light. Why are we here? Morty whispered. Rick's shoulders slumped. Because I need to see it. Just once, no tricks, no equations. No escape routes. Morty hesitated. You sure that's a good idea? Rick smirked faintly. Morty, since when have I ever had good ideas? The humor faded as fast as it came. He stepped closer to the door and the light shifted, flickering faster, almost as if reacting to him. Morty felt his chest tighten. Rick, wait. What if it hurts you? Rick glanced back, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. Then it'll hurt me, honest. He took another step forward. The air trembled. The hum grew deeper. The space around the door began to distort, like time itself was holding its breath. Morty wanted to reach out, to grab him, but something stopped him. Not fear, not hesitation, but a quiet understanding. This wasn't something he could stop. This was something Rick needed to face. Rick raised his hand toward the light. You know, Morty, he said softly, I used to think the universe was like a big machine, gears and patterns, everything running because it had to. But now, he trailed off, staring into the glow, I think it's more like a mirror. You only see what you're ready to. Morty took a step closer. And what if you don't like what you see? Rick smiled, that small, sad smile Morty had come to recognize. Then you change it, or you live with it. That's all anyone ever does. The light pulsed once more, stronger now. Rick's hand hovered inches away from it. Then slowly he pressed his palm against the glow. A ripple spread through the room, gentle but infinite. For a moment everything stopped. The hum, the lights, even the sense of gravity, all suspended in that perfect silence. Morty shielded his eyes as the light flared brighter, wrapping Rick in waves of shifting color, gold, blue, crimson, white. When the light faded, Rick was still standing. But he looked different. Not physically, not older, not younger, just realer, like the space around him finally caught up with who he truly was. He turned around. His eyes were wet. Rick? Morty said softly. Rick laughed under his breath, shaking his head. You were right, Morty. About what? Rick looked past him toward the stars. About heroes. Turns out being one isn't about saving anyone. It's about not running away from yourself. Morty didn't know what to say. The words hung there, simple and heavy, like a weight that had finally found a place to rest. Rick walked back to the console and shut off the sequence. The truth door faded, leaving behind a faint afterimage in the air, like the ghost of light refusing to leave completely. For a while, neither of them spoke. The ship resumed its slow hum, and the stars began to move again, realigning themselves into constellations Morty had never seen before. Rick leaned on the console, eyes closed. You ever wonder what it shows you, Morty? Morty frowned. What do you mean? Rick opened his eyes and looked at him. The truth door, what you'd see if you touched it. Morty hesitated. Maybe I don't want to know yet. Rick nodded as if that answer was the right one. Good, hold on to that. Curiosity's only beautiful when it doesn't burn you. Morty glanced at him. What did you see? Rick smiled faintly. The only thing that still scares me. Morty waited, but Rick didn't continue. The silence was its own kind of answer. Outside, a new star ignited, small, bright newborn. Its light reached the ship a few seconds later, brushing over Rick's face. For a moment he looked peaceful, almost free. Morty sat down beside him, resting his head on the cold metal wall. You okay? Rick exhaled slowly. For once, Morty, I think I might be. The two of them sat there in the quiet, watching that distant star grow stronger, its light cutting a soft path through the dark. Rick spoke again, barely above a whisper. You know what the funny part is? What? That door doesn't show you the truth of the universe. It shows you the truth of you. Morty thought about that, his eyes growing heavy. Then maybe we're not so small after all, Rick smiled. Maybe not. The hum of the ship deepened, like a lullaby sung by the cosmos. The edges of the room softened in Morty's vision. His eyelids grew heavier, the rhythm of space pulling him towards sleep. Before he drifted off, he heard Rick's voice one last time, soft, steady, almost tender. Sleep. Morty, the truth can wait till morning. The stars outside glowed a little brighter as if they'd heard him. The ship continued its slow journey through the silence, leaving ripples of light behind it like footprints in eternity. And somewhere beyond the walls of reality, the truth door faded completely, but not before leaving one last echo in the air. A whisper only Rick could hear. "You are still becoming." Rick smiled to himself, eyes closed. "Yeah," he murmured, barely audible. "Aren't we all?" The hum returned to its steady rhythm, and the ship slipped back into the dreaming dark, carrying them both toward whatever waited next. The silence came first. It wasn't the sudden kind, not the terrifying drop into stillness that follows an explosion. This one arrived like dusk, slow and steady, creeping through the ship's corridors, dimming lights one by one. Somewhere deep in the vessel, a soft alarm blinked red but made no sound. Morty woke to the faint shift in gravity. His body felt light, then heavy, then light again. The air had grown thin, dry with the metallic taste of ozone. He rubbed his eyes and saw the frost forming on the window, the universe outside pulsing faintly, like it too was catching its breath. "Rick?" he called. Rick was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside a holographic panel, tools scattered around him. He didn't look panicked, just thoughtful, calm in a way that made Morty uneasy. "The stabilizers?" Morty asked. Rick nodded without looking up. "Gone? Gone? Like, gone? Rick tapped at a flickering readout. "Like, hey Morty, remember gravity?" "Gone, the ship's folding in on itself. Probably took a hit from the entropy waves after we opened the door." Morty blinked. "So we're dying?" Rick gave a lazy shrug. "We're always dying. This time just happens to have better lighting." Morty stared at him, half angry, half confused. "How can you joke about that?" Rick finally looked up, eyes soft but distant. "Because if I don't, I'll start crying." "And honestly, Morty, I'm not in the mood for either." The ship groaned around them, deep, ancient, like the sound of an old tree splitting. Panels warped. Bolts drifted upward in slow motion, then froze midair as the artificial gravity flickered again. Morty floated slightly off the ground. His breath came in shaky bursts. "Can't you fix it?" Rick gave a hollow laugh. "Fix entropy? Sure, Morty, let me just go grab my screwdriver of God." He sighed. "No, I can't fix it. The ship's had enough of us. It's just letting go." Morty swallowed, his voice trembling. "So what do we do?" Rick's answer was quiet. "We make peace with it." The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. Morty looked around at the fading blue lights, the flickering consoles, the drifting tools, like stars inside the ship, losing their glow one by one. Everything that had once been loud and alive now seemed soft, reflective, almost reverent. Rick drifted closer to the viewport and pressed his hand against the glass. Outside, space rippled with light, fragments of galaxies swirling like dust in water. The dying sun they'd orbited earlier was collapsing inward, pulling the ship's orbit with it. Morty floated beside him, clutching the edge of a railing. "It's kinda beautiful," he whispered. Rick smirked faintly. "Yeah, cosmic destruction always has good aesthetics." The ship creaked again, the hull glowing faintly orange from the nearby star's implosion. Dust shimmered through the air inside, like snow caught in sunlight. Morty's voice broke through the hush. "Rick, do you ever think we could have done things differently?" Rick didn't answer right away. He watched the light folding across his reflection in the window, the same eyes that had seen universes burn and rebuild, the same hands that had built weapons and cures, and mistakes too big to name. "Finally," he said. "Every day." Morty nodded slowly. "Then why don't you change?" Rick turned toward him, a hint of sorrow flickering beneath his usual calm. "Because, Morty, sometimes knowing what's wrong isn't enough to fix it. Sometimes all you can do is stop making it worse." The words felt final, heavy but comforting too. The air began to shimmer. The hull trembled under invisible pressure. One of the ceiling beams cracked open, releasing a slow, graceful stream of debris. It floated between them, glittering. Morty reached out and touched a fragment, cold, weightless, spinning. "What happens when it goes?" Rick stared at the expanding light outside. Then it all becomes something else. It always does. They drifted together in the dim room, watching as space bent around the ship. The dying star's core had collapsed, leaving behind a spiral of energy so bright it painted Rick's face gold. His hair shimmered faintly in the glow. Morty whispered, "Is that a black hole?" Rick smiled faintly. "Not yet, but close. Give it a few minutes." Morty frowned. "A few minutes? What are we still doing here then?" Rick chuckled. "Wouldn't be polite to leave before the end credits." Morty couldn't help but laugh, a small, tired laugh that came from somewhere deep. For the first time, it didn't sound forced. Rick reached for a nearby console, flipping a final switch. The ship's core let out a low hum, steady and warm. "Manual override. We'll coast it out. No thrusters, no fight. Just float." The screens dimmed. The hum softened. For the first time since they'd entered space, everything felt still. Morty drifted closer to Rick. "You think we'll survive?" Rick shrugged again, eyes still on the stars. "Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't matter. What matters is we're here. Not running, not breaking things, just being." The floor tilted gently beneath them as the ship rotated toward the collapsing sun. The view filled the window entirely, light bending, twisting, consuming. It looked like the universe was inhaling. Morty felt a tear roll upward, floating beside his face. "It's so weird." "I'm not scared," Rick nodded. "That's the trick, Morty. The universe can't scare you when you stop pretending you control it." The collapse accelerated. The sun folded into itself, a silent implosion of gold and red. The light engulfed the ship, and for a heartbeat everything vanished. No pain. No heat, just stillness, then a pulse, a single beat of existence echoing through infinity. Morty opened his eyes. They were still inside the ship, surrounded by faint, rippling light. Space itself seemed to shimmer, softer now, calmer. It was as if the collapse hadn't destroyed them. It had remade them somewhere else. Rick looked around, blinking. "Huh? Guess we hit the soft reset option." Morty laughed weakly. "You mean we lived?" Rick's grin was tired but genuine. "More or less. Maybe the universe decided we weren't done talking yet." They floated in the quiet, looking out at a new horizon. The dying sun was gone. In its place was a cluster of newborn stars, small and bright, like tiny promises scattered through the void. Rick whispered, "Every ending's just a new formula waiting for variables." Morty smiled. "You're such a nerd," Rick chuckled. "Takes one to recognize one." The two drifted side by side, weightless, watching those new stars blink into life. Somewhere deep in the background hum, the ship's AI flickered back to life for just a moment. One small light blinking on the console, steady and rhythmic. Rick glanced at it, then back at the stars. "Let's not fix it this time," he said softly. "Let's just drift," Morty nodded. "Yeah, I think I like that." The ship moved slowly, gliding between the new constellations, the wreckage behind them glowing faintly, like a trail of memories fading into the dark. Rick took one last sip from the flask, exhaled, and closed his eyes. "We made it through another collapse, Morty." Morty smiled. "Yeah, but this one felt different," Rick nodded. "It was supposed to." Outside, the stars burned quietly, eternal and patient. As the ship disappeared into their light, two silhouettes drifting through the endless calm. Not running anymore, just resting. The stars outside the viewport pulsed like slow heartbeats, one after another, fading into the deep quiet of space. The ship drifted soundlessly, a fragment of light swallowed by a sea of infinite black. No alarms, no more missions, just the soft vibration of what remained, a ghostly hum that seemed to echo the last traces of their breathing. Morty floated near the control panel, his hand brushing gently against the worn metal. It was warm, faintly alive, like something that remembered being a home. The panels had stopped glowing hours ago, but he still found himself touching them, as if the ship could feel his gratitude. He looked toward the other pods, small round chambers lining the corridor, each one now sealed and drifting away, carrying what was left of the Vindicators. There were no farewells. No grand speeches or final words, just the quiet understanding that everything that needed to be said already had been, through glances, through shared silence, through that small, unspoken love that grows between people who've been through too much together. Rick stood by the main hatch, staring at the stars. The light reflected across his face in soft ribbons of blue and gold. For once his eyes weren't calculating, they were still tired, almost human. In his hand was the flask untouched. He turned it slowly, watching the way the liquid caught the starlight. Morty drifted closer. "You're not drinking?" Rick didn't answer right away. He ran his thumb along the edge of the cap, then closed it tightly. "No point," he said finally. "It won't taste like anything out here." Morty smiled faintly. "Do you say that like you've tried?" Rick let out a quiet laugh, the kind that sounds more like an exhale than amusement. "Yeah, kid. I've tried everything. Most of it twice." A small silence followed, gentle and heavy at once. Through the viewport, Morty watched the first escape pod drift farther away. Its trail shimmered like dust catching morning light. Inside it somewhere was Supernova, or what was left of her spirit. She'd stopped arguing hours before, her anger spent, her grief emptied into the stars. Now she was just gone, floating toward whatever came next. Morty whispered, "You think they'll make it?" Rick shrugged. "Define make it. Maybe they'll live. Maybe they'll die. Maybe they'll just drift until they become part of something bigger. Who knows?" "That's kind of the beauty of it." Morty frowned. "That's not really comforting." Rick turned toward him, his gaze softer than before. "Wasn't meant to be comforting." "Just true." The lights in the hallway flickered again. Rick walked toward the navigation console, tapping one last command. The main hatch released a slow hiss, the air escaping like a sigh. The ship seemed to breathe out its final exhale. Rick gestured toward the last two pods. "You take the left one, Morty. It's calibrated for your vitals. Should keep you alive long enough to get picked up." Morty didn't move. "What about you?" Rick smirked faintly. "What about me?" "Come with me," Morty said. "There's room." Rick looked at the empty pod beside Morty's. He tilted his head, thinking for a long moment. The quiet stretched between them, soft as a lullaby. Then slowly he shook his head. "Nah, I'll stay a little longer. Someone's got to make sure the lights go out properly." Morty's throat tightened. "You always say stuff like that. Like you want to stay behind." Rick turned away from him, looking out at the stars. "Maybe I do. Somebody's got to keep the universe company." Morty floated closer, his voice small, trembling. "I don't want to leave you." Rick sighed, almost smiling. "You never really do, Morty, that's the thing. You'll carry me around in that weird brain of yours, all the sarcasm, all the science crap, all the dumb jokes. I'll be there every time you try to do something stupid, and hear my voice telling you why it won't work." Morty laughed softly, but his eyes stung. "You're the worst at goodbyes," Rick chuckled. "That's because I don't believe in them. Nothing ever really ends, kid. It just changes format." The hum of the engines grew quieter. One by one, the lights faded to black, until only the starlight filled the cabin. Morty looked down at his hands, then at Rick, the man who had shown him everything and nothing all at once. He wanted to say something profound, something meaningful, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded. Rick nodded back. "Go on, you'll be fine." Morty climbed into the pod. The glass canopy closed slowly, sealing him inside. The interior lights glowed dim blue. He could see Rick through the window, just a shadow now, silhouetted against the endless stars. Rick raised his hand in a lazy half-wave. Morty mirrored it, pressing his palm against the glass. The ship shuddered gently as the pod disengaged, releasing him into the void. For a moment, the silence was total. Morty watched through the viewport as the main ship grew smaller. Rick stood at the edge of the hatch, coat fluttering faintly in the vacuum, eyes reflecting the last light of the collapsing sun. Then the ship turned, slowly, drifting toward the light. Morty closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. The hum of the pod merged with the rhythm of his heartbeat. He could almost hear Rick's voice echoing softly in his head, dry, sarcastic, but oddly warm. "Don't screw it up this time, Morty." He smiled. "I'll try." The stars passed by, silent witnesses to 1,000 forgotten stories. Morty felt the weight of exhaustion settle over him. Not fear, not grief, just the gentle surrender that comes at the end of something vast. His eyelids grew heavy. The pod rocked slightly as it drifted, carried by invisible tides of cosmic dust. He whispered to himself, "We tried." It was the truest sentence he'd ever spoken. The pod's lights dimmed further, sinking to his slowing breath. His body relaxed, his mind softened, and the boundary between dreaming and waking blurred. The stars above him blurred into streaks of color, blue, violet, gold, all blending into the quiet hum of forever. Back on the dying ship, Rick stood alone, watching the final pod disappear into the distance. His expression didn't change, but his eyes followed it until it became nothing more than a faint glimmer. He reached for his flask, then stopped. "Good job, kid," he murmured. He turned toward the control panel, flicked one last switch, and the ship began to fade into shadow. The stars outside brightened, swallowing the vessel whole. There was no explosion, no sound, just light folding around silence, like the universe tucking itself into bed. In the emptiness that followed, a single thought lingered in the dark. The echo of a laugh, a sigh, a heartbeat that refused to vanish, and in a distant pod drifting through the night, Morty dreamed, and not of chaos, not of fear, but of floating forever beside the man who once called himself a god, and learned at last how to rest. The night stretched endlessly across the sky above the Smith household. A gentle hum filled the garage, the sound of a machine that hadn't been touched in weeks. The clutter of wires and glass, tools and forgotten bottles, all rested under the pale glow of a single bulb, just drifted lazily through the beam of light, like small galaxies suspended in air. Rick sat in his old recliner, head tilted back, eyes half open but seeing nothing. The garage felt smaller tonight, not because the walls had changed, but because the silence had grown larger. He had dreamed again. It wasn't the usual chaos of flying ships or interdimensional paradoxes. It was calm, almost painfully so. In his dream there had been no voices, no explosions, only starlight and the faint rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't his. Morty's, maybe. Or perhaps just the universe's pulse, reminding him that even gods get tired. Rick opened his eyes slowly. The ceiling looked back at him, blank and patient. A half-empty bottle of something potent sat beside him, untouched. He reached for it out of habit, but his fingers hesitated halfway. For once the craving wasn't for escape. It was for stillness, for quiet, for that dream again. Outside, the wind rustled faintly through the trees. The sound reminded him of the hum of a spaceship engine, a noise he once found comforting. Now it just made him feel like something was missing. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor. Beneath his feet, an old stain marked where a portal gun had once overheated and melted part of the concrete. He remembered laughing about it with Morty. Back then, everything was a joke, a way to avoid thinking too hard about why he needed to laugh. He sighed, long and low. "Guess you can't build your way out of yourself, huh?" His voice echoed faintly in the garage. No one answered. The tools remained still. The machine slept. For the first time in a long time, Rick let the silence stay. In the dream, he had been somewhere beyond time, a quiet stretch of sky between dying stars. Morty had been there too, though not quite as he knew him. The boy's face had been soft, peaceful, without fear or doubt. He'd turned toward Rick and said nothing, but his expression spoke a language Rick hadn't heard in decades. Forgiveness, the kind that doesn't need words. Rick rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. The dream had felt so real that he could still feel its warmth in his chest, like the echo of a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. It made him uncomfortable. He wasn't used to feeling anything that lingered this long. He stood and walked to the workbench, glancing at the endless array of half-built gadgets and broken prototypes, each one a reflection of something he'd tried to fix that wasn't mechanical. Every invention, a metaphor for a wound he didn't know how to heal. On the far side of the bench sat a small, cracked screen, a remnant of the ship's data log. He'd salvaged it weeks ago, though he hadn't admitted it to anyone. The Vindicators' final transmission glowed faintly on the display. He could see fragments, blurred images, distorted sound. Laughter, crying, silence. Morty's voice came through once, clear and steady. "We tried." Rick froze. The words carried more weight than the sound could hold. It wasn't pride or even sadness. It was something simpler, deeper. Acceptance. Rick lowered his gaze. "Yeah, kid," he whispered. "We did." He turned off the screen and leaned against the workbench, eyes closed. The air smelled faintly of oil, ozone, and something older, nostalgia. The kind that sneaks up on you when you're too tired to fight it. He thought about the Vindicators, how loud they'd been, how self-righteous. All that talk about heroism and sacrifice, as if saving a galaxy could make up for the mess inside their own hearts. He'd mocked them for it, called them hypocrites. Maybe he'd been right. But maybe he'd been mocking himself too, because deep down Rick Sanchez had always wanted to believe in something pure, something that couldn't be dismantled or disproved. He'd just never found it, until Morty. The boy had been his constant, the one variable that refused to break under the weight of his chaos. Time and again, Morty had followed him into the void, faced gods and monsters, and somehow still found a reason to care. That was his superpower. Not brilliance, not bravery, just care. Rick smiled faintly. You'd make a terrible scientist, Morty, but a damn good human. He sat down again, the recliner creaking under his weight. The wind outside had died. The world was quiet. For a moment he imagined Morty sleeping peacefully in his room, dreaming of something gentle, something that didn't hurt. The thought calmed him in a way he didn't expect. He leaned back and closed his eyes. The soft hum of the garage filled the silence again, blending with the rhythm of his breathing. He drifted back toward that dream. The stars unfolded above him, slow and deliberate. He walked through them barefoot, the void cool beneath his steps. He could see Morty ahead. Sitting at the edge of nothing, legs dangling into forever. Rick joined him. No words. Just the two of them, watching galaxies fall asleep. Morty turned, smiling faintly. You made it, Rick shrugged. Guess I did. They sat there for a long time. The universe didn't speak, but it didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already being said in the silence between breaths. When Rick finally opened his eyes again, the light in the garage had dimmed. Morning hadn't come yet, but it was close. He reached for the bottle once more, then set it back down. He didn't need it tonight. Maybe tonight, he said softly. The universe doesn't need saving. He exhaled slowly, feeling the words settle inside him. The bulb above flickered once and went out, leaving only moonlight spilling through the cracks in the window. Rick sat in the half-darkness, a faint smile on his face, and let sleep take him. For the first time in years, it wasn't the sleep of exhaustion or drunkenness. It was rest, pure, unguarded rest, and somewhere beyond dreams, two figures floated side by side among the stars, not as scientist and sidekick, not as hero and fool, but as two quiet souls who had finally found a moment of peace. The garage stayed silent. The wind returned, gentle as a lullaby. Everything felt still, complete. Enough! Rick murmured something that sounded like a laugh, then drifted deeper, the edges of the world softening into blur. And in that infinite calm, the last thought that crossed his mind wasn't about regret or genius or loss. It was a whisper he'd never said aloud, not even to himself. Good night, Morty. And with that, Rick Sanchez, the man who ran from God's galaxies, and himself, finally dreamed. The sun had just begun to spill its first light across the Smith household, soft and golden. The walls still carried the coolness of night, and the air was thick with that quiet, uncertain peace that lingers just before morning. Morty stirred in his bed, tangled in sheets that felt too heavy. His eyes blinked open, slow and unfocused. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then the familiar ceiling came into view, posters half peeling, faint hum of the fan above, the smell of home. But something was different. The silence wasn't the usual morning quiet. It was thicker, heavier, like the air was holding its breath. Morty sat up, rubbing his eyes. He could still feel the faint trace of a dream, one that had felt too real to fade. He tried to hold on to it, but it slipped through his mind like water through fingers. There had been stars. A voice, laughter. And Rick, always Rick. He pushed the blanket aside and stood, bare feet touching the cold floor. Outside, a bird called weakly. The world was waking, but slowly, as if unsure whether it wanted to. Morty stretched and looked at his reflection in the mirror. His hair stuck out wildly, and his eyes looked older somehow, not tired but thoughtful. The kind of eyes that had seen too much for a kid his age. He smiled faintly at his reflection, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. You look like you've been through an apocalypse, he muttered. Then he chuckled softly. I guess that's not totally wrong. He turned and left his room. The hallway felt longer than usual. Sunlight was creeping through the curtains, casting thin lines of gold across the carpet. Downstairs he could hear faint movement. His mom in the kitchen, probably. The smell of toast and coffee drifted upward. Everything was normal. Comfortably, painfully normal. But Rick's garage door was still closed. That door had always been a symbol of chaos, of adventure, of danger and brilliance. It hummed with energy, secrets, and sometimes explosions. But now it was quiet, still, and that quiet made Morty's stomach twist. He hesitated outside it. The old metal handle was cold under his palm. He stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then slowly he pushed the door open. The familiar smell hit him first. Oil, dust, ozone, and faint traces of alcohol. The air inside was heavier, like time had stopped in this room. Rick's chair sat where it always did, facing the center of the garage. The tools were scattered across the table. Machines blinked softly, half-powered and half-forgotten, and Rick wasn't there. Morty froze. For a moment panic flared, the kind that crawled up from the gut and caught in the throat. But then he saw it. Rick's coat draped neatly over the back of the chair. A bottle beside it unopened. His portal gun lay on the table, silent, its green glow faint but steady. Morty stepped closer, his heart thudding. Rick. His voice came out small, uncertain. You in here? No answer. Only the soft hum of a cooling machine. Morty swallowed hard. He moved to the chair and touched the coat. It was warm, recently worn. He looked around. No portals, no scattered notes, no frantic half-built projects. Just stillness. And for Rick, stillness was rare. On the desk he noticed something. A small data drive, its metal surface catching the morning light. Beside it, a note scrawled in Rick's uneven handwriting. "For when you're ready, Morty. Don't rush the universe." Morty blinked, reading the words twice. His chest tightened. He turned the note over, blank. He picked up the drive, feeling its weight in his palm. Small, cold, mysterious. The kind of thing Rick never left lying around without a reason. He slid it into the nearby console. The screen flickered to life. Static first, then color. Then Rick's voice, soft, almost calm. "Hey Morty, if you're seeing this, it means I'm probably not around right now. Or maybe I just fell asleep in another dimension. You know how it is." Morty's breath caught. Rick's face appeared on the screen, and tired but peaceful. His eyes didn't have their usual sharpness. They were distant, reflective. "I used to think dreams were for people who didn't have the guts to face reality," Rick continued. "But maybe I was wrong. Maybe dreams are just practice for the kind of peace we don't get to have while we're awake." Morty sat down slowly, eyes locked on the screen. "I've been thinking a lot, Morty. About us. About all the stuff we've done. The good, the bad, the really messed up. You've seen things no one your age should ever have to see. And yet somehow you keep showing up. You keep caring." Rick paused. He looked down as if searching for the right words. "I've always envied that about you, Morty. You care when you shouldn't. You forgive when you shouldn't. You believe when I stopped knowing how." Morty felt his throat tighten. His hands trembled in his lap. Rick chuckled faintly on screen. "Don't get me wrong. I'm still me, still cynical, still a bastard half the time. But I figured, if there's one lesson you should take from all this, from me, it's that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is to let yourself rest." The video flickered again. Rick leaned closer to the camera. "You don't have to fix everything, Morty. Not every universe needs saving. Not every mistake needs rewriting. Sometimes you just gotta—" The screen went dark. Morty stared at it for a long time. The silence that followed felt heavy but not empty. It was full of meaning, of memory, of everything unsaid between them. He exhaled shakily. "You're such an idiot, Rick," he whispered, though the words carried no anger, only affection. "But I get it now." He stood and looked around the garage again. It didn't feel lonely anymore. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a long, honest conversation. Morty smiled faintly, picked up Rick's coat and draped it over his shoulders. It was too big, smelled faintly of smoke and metal, but it felt right. He turned toward the door. As he stepped into the morning light, he looked back once. The portal gun still glowed softly on the table. He reached for it, hesitated, then left it where it was. Some things didn't need to be used. Some things just needed to rest. Outside, the sun had risen fully. The sky was pale blue, streaked with soft clouds. The air was warm against his face. Morty took a deep breath and smiled to himself. Maybe Rick wasn't gone. Not really. Maybe he was just dreaming. Somewhere out there among the stars, And maybe for once that was enough. Morty walked toward the horizon, each step lighter than the last. The world around him hummed with quiet life. The wind, the distant laughter of kids heading to school, the rustle of trees. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel like he was running from something. He was walking toward something new, something peaceful. And in the farthest corners of the universe, if you listened closely enough, you could almost hear Rick's laugh echo and soft content, and utterly free. The night was deep and endless, the kind that makes you forget where the sky ends and the soul begins. The stars drifted in slow silence, spread across the universe like 1,000 sleeping memories. Somewhere among them, in the space between worlds, the echoes of the Vindicators still shimmered, faint but eternal. Morty sat in his backyard, wrapped in an old blanket. The grass was cool against his legs, and the air carried that gentle hum of life winding down. Fireflies blinked across the lawn like tiny universes of their own. It had been years since that strange, haunting night aboard the ship, the one that had felt more like a dream than a mission. Sometimes he wondered if it had even happened at all. He leaned back and looked up at the sky. It looked the same as always, and yet he knew it wasn't. The longer you live, the more you realize the stars aren't distant. They're just old friends waiting to be remembered. Somewhere a door creaked open. The faint sound of Rick's footsteps echoed across the grass. Morty didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He could tell the rhythm of those steps anywhere. Part swagger, part stumble, part something he'd never been able to name. Rick stopped beside him, holding 2 mugs of something steaming. He handed one over wordlessly. Morty took it, smiling faintly. "Coffee." "Hot chocolate," Rick muttered. Figured we'd try not blowing up our insides for once. They sat in silence for a while, sipping quietly. The universe didn't need words tonight. It just needed warmth. Morty glanced at him. Rick looked older somehow. Not just in the lines on his face, but in the way he stared at the stars. Like he was finally seeing them as something more than mathematical points of light. His eyes were softer now, though still sharp enough to cut through time itself. "You remember them?" Morty asked finally. Rick didn't answer at first. He just stared at the sky, then exhaled softly. "Yeah, all of them. Even the ones I tried to forget." Morty nodded slowly. "Do you ever think about what it all meant?" Rick chuckled dryly. "Meaning's overrated, Morty. The universe doesn't owe you closure. You just make peace with the chaos and hope you don't lose too much of yourself along the way." Morty looked down at his mug. The steam swirled upward like a tiny galaxy, fading into the night. "You sound like you're finally okay with that." Rick tilted his head. "Maybe I am. Maybe not. But I'm learning that some things don't need fixing. Some things just..." They fell quiet again. A soft wind stirred the trees. The fireflies danced closer, their faint lights flickering like coded messages from another realm. After a while, Morty spoke again. "You know, I used to think heroes were people who saved the day. But I think now, maybe heroes are just people who keep going. Even when no one's watching." Rick smirked. "Sounds like something you'd say in a college essay." Morty laughed, a quiet, genuine laugh that melted into the night air. "Maybe. But it's true, though." Rick glanced at him, and for the briefest moment his smirk softened into something close to pride. "Yeah, Morty, it's true." They sat there together, a scientist who once tried to outthink the universe and a boy who learned to forgive it. The stars above blinked like the slow heartbeat of eternity. Morty's gaze drifted. "Do you ever think they're still out there? The Vindicators, I mean. Maybe somewhere. In another version of everything?" Rick shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. But even if they're gone, the universe doesn't really delete anything. It just changes the shape of the memory. Energy, light, stories, they all hang around. Even the bad ones," Morty smiled softly. "So, in a way, they're still shining." Rick leaned back, taking another sip. "Yeah, somewhere they still shine." For a long while, neither of them spoke. The night seemed endless but gentle, as if time itself had decided to rest for a while. Morty closed his eyes and listened to the distant hum of the universe. It wasn't the sound of chaos or invention. It was just peace. He thought about all they'd been through, the laughter, the fear, the absurdity. He thought about the people they'd met, the ones they couldn't save and the ones they barely remembered. And somehow, in the quiet of that night, all of it felt okay because life, he realized, wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to be lived, with all its weirdness, wonder, and warmth. Rick stood up and stretched, the joints in his back cracking faintly. "All right, kid. I'm heading in. Try not to philosophize yourself to sleep out here," Morty chuckled. "No promises." Rick turned toward the house but paused at the doorway. He looked back at Morty, his expression unreadable in the dark. "You did good, Morty. Don't ever think you didn't." Before Morty could reply, Rick was gone, swallowed by the soft glow of the kitchen light. Morty stared at the stars a little longer. The constellations shimmered faintly, each one a story without an ending. He raised his mug in a quiet toast to them. "To all the heroes," he whispered. "The real ones. The ones nobody remembers." A faint meteor streaked across the sky, and a single flash of light, vanishing as quietly as it came. Morty smiled, letting the warmth of it settle deep in his chest. He closed his eyes. Somewhere beyond the reach of galaxies, maybe the Vindicators still drifted, laughing, forgiving, shining. And somewhere even farther still, maybe Rick was still building something, muttering to himself, inventing the next impossible idea, or maybe he was simply resting. And that thought, that tiny, fragile possibility, and was enough. The universe breathed. The night exhaled. And Morty, half asleep under the stars, let go of everything except the peace that filled him. "Thanks for spending this time with us," the narrator's voice murmured softly, fading like a lullaby. "Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man." The stars flickered once more, then slowly dimmed into dream.